working. So this is the way that you're going to be hearing us until I go hoarse this afternoon.
The supervisor, it worked last night, all right? So, and the supervisor arrives at 9 AM, so, yeah, so hopefully that person.
We'll have it. Michael Wilson is the stated clerk of the Synod and also some of y'all's colleagues as stated clerk of the Presbytery of Donegal. I am Forrest Clausen. I am the Synod executive of the Synod of the Trinity. So we are your hosts for today. We are going to do our best to keep this from turning into the Michael and Forrest show by drawing upon some of you. If you haven't been asked, you can stop panicking right now. Those of you who have been asked, feel free to have your panic level rise gradually over the next hour or so. But the goal is to draw upon some of the wisdom that already exists in the room from those who have been at multiple General Assemblies and seen some things happen that they would like to forewarn you about and or promise you as the case may be, depending on the circumstances. So that's sort of the lay of the land for the day. You have your agenda in front of you. Those are rough clock times, but our goal is to get you out of here by around 2 or 2:30 this afternoon, because we recognize that some of you have rather significant drives to get home. And some of you who may have significant drives to get home also may have significant sermon prep that you're not finished with yet.
No.
At least if your life as a pastor is anything like mine used to be. Two other announcements before we launch. One is, as you might have heard with the ding ding a moment or two ago, this is being recorded on Zoom. The goal for that is that some of your colleagues will not have had the opportunity either to be here today or even to watch today. At least one presbytery that I know of had a leadership training event scheduled ahead of this that ended up being a conflict, and so they want to be able to watch it with their own group later. So think about that as you are speaking up. Don't let that intimidate you, but maybe let that limit some of the snarkiness that you might otherwise have. I just use your own judgment. And then the last announcement that I'm going to make is, if you did not yet ask somebody yourself and or make accommodations yourself, checkout time is at 11 o'clock. And what I have learned from the folks at the front desk is they did not make any special arrangements with us for that to be extended. So at the break at 10:15, that would probably be a good thing for you to take care of. You should have had your breakfast comped in advance. If it wasn't, if you ended up paying for it, please submit that back to the Synod so that we can reimburse you. And I think that's all of the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's begin kind of setting this stuff in a more biblical context. I recognize that Louisville and Jerusalem aren't exactly the same. Our theology is a little different than that, but I thought maybe the spirit of this psalm might give us a feel of going up to Salt Lake City with the kind of joy that the old Israelites went up to Jerusalem once a year. So will you respond liturgically with me? I was glad when they said to me, "Let us go unto the house of the Lord." Jerusalem, built as a city that is bound firmly together, as was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord.
For there the thrones for judgment were set up, and the thrones of the house of David.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you.
Peace be within your walls, and security within your towers.
For the sake of my relatives and friends, I will say, peace be within you.
For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will see your good.
Good morning. Do we have prompting questions?
They're, I think, yeah, they're after these two slides, but so, there you go.
Okay, so for the sake of you getting to know a little bit about your peers, and we're not going to do this all the way around the room, so you're not going to get to know a little bit about all of your peers, but a little bit about a little of your peers. If you will, at each of your tables, and for the folks on Zoom, Mike is going to move you into a breakout room in a minute so you can talk with each other without all of us hearing you. Name, presbytery that you are with or from, as the case may be, what presbytery is your church a part of? What GA committee have you been assigned to serve on? What are you looking forward to? What are you anxious about? And again, a reminder of what we're about here. How do you imagine God at work at General Assembly coming this summer? Because it's easy sometimes to imagine how we're afraid the devil will be at work at General Assembly. But God is there too. And as we believe as Presbyterians, ultimately God wins, even if it takes a few years. So take a few minutes to talk. We will regather either as the volume sort of lulls down, signaling that you've all had a chance to talk, or I'm going to snap this one shut and hand it over to Michael at 9:30 as the case may be.
How long, Forrest? Forrest, how long you want? How long you want in a room?
Maximum of 20 minutes. It looks like
A year. I'm really delighted to do that. I'm also the state clerk for Donegal Presbyterian. Donegal Presbyterian is southeastern Pennsylvania, York, Lancaster, and Chester County, just west of Philadelphia. Mike, could you bring up the schedule? We thought we want to give you just a little bit of an overview of what today is going to look like, and just see if you've got any questions about that. Here's our, I mean, just as you've got, as you've got kind of the arc of the day as I go through it, just keep in mind, here's our goal today. We want you all to show up in your committees and in plenary in Salt Lake City feeling as comfortable as absolutely possible. We know that for most people, going to General Assembly it's their first time. Statistically, it's just, most people are going for their first time. And so whatever we can do from our level to help you all have confidence to be involved, have a sense that God really called you there with a purpose. And a lot of that information helps with that. It's not the only thing that helps, but information helps. And so today is a combination of information about the denomination, which you may or may not know, about being at General Assembly, which again, you may or may not know, and then about what we have with Forrest and I work with our colleagues in the Synod of the Trinity, state clerks and executives in the Synod of Trinity, just to come up with a list of what we think are kind of some things that would be good for you to know about that are going to happen at GA. And we know that list is not comprehensive. If it was comprehensive, we'd do GA, right? Like we march through all the things. So we may say something in that where you're like, I don't think that's important. Or you may go home and we can discover something and be like, why didn't they talk about that? And the answer will be, we did our best. Like that would be the answer to that. So, and so obviously we're not intentionally going to leave something out that we thought was important or anything like that. So here's what we're doing. So we did gathering and devotions. We had a chance to introduce one another. And we do hope that today that you do mingle a little bit and meet other people who are here, because the people in this room will be at plenary, right? Plus more people. So here's your opportunity to know somebody else in the room at plenary, even if it's only a little bit. And we think that matters. It does matter to walk into a room and be like, oh, I've seen that person before. Hi, Dave, it's good to see you again, right? Even if it's only met once. So that certainly is a big part of today. And if you leave today going, you know what, I know the name of another person, and now when I walk into the big plenary room at General Assembly, I will not feel like, who the heck is gonna talk to me? There's somebody like that, that's a good thing. Like that would be success today. So that would be part of it. We're going to do, next, I'm gonna do just a little bit about us, how we're organized nationally. And then Forrest is gonna talk with you specifically and show you online PC Biz. You get to learn a whole nother website. So exciting, like civic right, something exciting. What could you ask for more, right? We'll take a break. And then one of the things that we recognize about General Assembly is that your committee at General Assembly, for some of us, it will be the same size or maybe even larger than some presbytery meetings we're at, right? And that's going to be the committee. And it will not be a committee of people that have known one another for years. So to just have a little bit of a sense of how does it work to be a committee member at General Assembly, right? Like what are your options? What do you do? What do you need to know? And then you're going to sit in a plenary hall, and there's going to be several hundred people, and there's going to be 9 microphones, and you're going to need to be like, am I going to talk? And where am I going to go? And we're going to do a little bit of work with you all that just, again, like the more you know, right, the more you can have confidence. Like when you know what you want to do, you know how to do it. So we'll do some work on that. Then we will do lunch. And of course, hopefully, how do you do it without being annoying? Some of us have been to GA long enough to know that at every General Assembly, there is that person. And that person shows up at microphone 1, and then they show up at microphone 3, and then they show up at microphone 7, and pretty soon, those who are around are like, oh, that person. So in all honesty, we would like none of our people to be that person. That's the truth. After lunch, we are also aware that General Assembly is a physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually taxing experience. You will give of yourselves, and you will think hard, and you will pray hard, and we expect, and not that we hope you do, you feel the weight of being part of the group of people who are called by God to make decisions for our denomination. It's a serious and big responsibility. And we are undoubtedly, hey, maybe you will love everything that the General Assembly does. It's possible that you'll go home and you'll be like, what an amazing group of people. They did what I wanted every single time. Again, it is statistically unlikely. So how do we prepare ourselves for that? And how do we think about these things? In particular, in a congregational setting where most of us operate, if a session makes a decision that we really disagree with, what happens is many of us go back the next month and we say to the session, I think that was a bad idea. And the session talks about it a little bit more. Right? Whereas you're going to leave and all your decisions go into the wind. And stuff will happen to them that we expect and we didn't expect, right? So, but you won't come back next month and say, can we talk about that a little more? So, it has effect. So we want to talk with you about that. And then, as I said, we have come up with, our version of kind of like, what's the landscape of issues? So that's the arc of the day and the plan of the day. If you really want something talked about, or you've got a question and it's not on that, find Forrest or I at the break and say kind of like, hey, is this in there? Is it not in there? And we absolutely, right, this is this event is for you all, it's not for us. So we did our best to get it together for you all. And please let us know if there's more we can do. Any questions about that? All right. One of the things that we are aware of with this particular General Assembly is for several hundred years, General Assembly happened roughly the same way. Everybody came into a city and they looked around, they elected a moderator, and then they went to worship. And then for a couple of days, they got in their committees in these big rooms, and then they went back to a bigger room called plenary, and they worked. And the one night they didn't work that late, and the next night they didn't work that late. And the next night, everybody called and said, we got a lot to do, and they worked really late. And then on Friday night, they worked really late. That's how General Assembly happened, like all the time. And then on Saturday, people started to trickle out as they went to get on planes, and a budget got adopted. I mean, that's, I would say, like, that happened for like 100 years. And then COVID happened. It was like literally, it was a switch for us, a light switch. And so in 2020, everybody got online. There were no committee meetings. And if you watch that, it was wild. It was just, I mean, it's just wild to watch a group of several hundred people try to work together with no advanced preparation, and they did their best, right? So we all said to one another, we don't think we want to do all plenary all the time for GA. I'm supposed to be pretty clear that we're going to do that again. And so in 2022, all the committees got together in person in Louisville, and then the plenary happened online. And so we tried that. And there was some conversation about how'd that go, and how did that work? And we thought, well, let's try this, which is what you all are going to do, which is you're going to do your committees online, and then you're all going to go and get in a big room and do the plenary, roughly like how we, have done in the past. And folks, we have no idea how that's going to go. We just don't, right? It's never happened before. Like, you all could emerge on the end of this General Assembly and say, that was a great way to work together as a national church. Like, that was the beta version, let's improve it, and that ought to be the, that ought to be the way forward. You all might emerge from that and say, it was a horrible idea. Let me start, like, I mean, and Boris and I can be a little sanguine about that because we're not really responsible for doing it, right? So I mean, I've got a lot of empathy for the people who are figuring this all out and doing all the logistics for this, but you all are going to help shape what the future is like for us as a national church with your experience this year. And I was speaking for myself, I'm really looking forward to what you all say back to, I mean, you could say it to us and we'll pass it on, but what we all say back collectively, to the office of the General Assembly about how it was to get over. So I would just encourage you to keep that in mind. One of the things that, if you could go to my slide for the national church, which is going to be really hard for you all to see. One of the things that we are aware of as people gather for a General Assembly is that for many people, there are two entities in the PCUSA. There's Louisville and there's the Board of Pensions. Like, that's, I would just say, just roughly, most people go, well, there's the stuff that happens in Louisville, and then there's the Board of Pensions, and maybe the Board of Pensions isn't in Louisville, but maybe you don't even know that. I mean, which is all fine. So for you all to have a little more accurate landscape of what how our national church is actually structured, I want to spend a little bit of time with you. And this chart, which you can probably barely, if at all, read, which is fine. It is the chart on our national website, and in my opinion, it's not accurate. So I didn't print it out for you. I said, my website and say, well, it's actually, I don't think it's accurate. Our national church, your national church, right? Our national church has a number of distinct national agencies. Those agencies will be bringing reports and business to the General Assembly. And so we thought it is helpful for you all to know just a little bit about what they are. And so when they come, you're not like, I didn't know that was a national agency, or I've never heard of those people before, right? Like, so that's the idea here, okay? So where I want to start first is to draw a distinction for you between two agencies that is becoming not a distinction in the future. How's that for, like, what's the lay of the land for you all? In our main office in Louisville, there are two agencies, one called the Office of the General Assembly and another called the Presbyterian Mission Agency. They are distinct agencies with two different governing, they're not actually either one of them technically a board in the legal sense. One of them they call a committee, the other they call a board. The Office of the General Assembly's head is the stated clerk of the Presbyterian Church USA. You might be familiar with J. Herbert Nelson, who was our stated clerk until roughly a year ago when he resigned for health reasons. And now Bronwyn Boswell is our stated clerk. She is the acting stated clerk of the denomination, and she will not be the stated clerk at the end of the General Assembly because the Committee on the Office of the General Assembly decided that the acting / interim stated clerk would not be eligible to apply for the new stated clerk position. So, and you'll hear us talk about that. Does mean you'll be electing a stated clerk. It's one of the things that you all will do. That's the Office of the General Assembly. The Office of the General Assembly is the body that's responsible for putting on General Assembly. It's the Office of the General Assembly. They also are responsible for supporting mid-councils, running ordination exams, and doing a number of other things. That's the Office of the General Assembly. Then there is the Presbyterian Mission Agency. That agency is in the same building in Louisville as the Office of the General Assembly. The president of the Presbyterian Mission Agency is Diane Gibbons Moffett. Undoubtedly, you will hear her speak on the floor of the General Assembly. She'll bring a report from the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Those are two distinct agencies with actually very distinct cultures. And for years, they have existed in the same building. In the wisdom of the General Assembly over the course of around the last 6 years, it was decided it hasn't been really a great idea to have two distinct, those agencies as two distinct agencies. And so we have a commission called the Unification Commission. It's a unification commission of the General Assembly. They will bring a report to you as the General Assembly. Their job is to unify those two agencies. Along the way, because the Presbyterian Mission Agency was the legal board of the PCUSA, the General Assembly decided to split that out.
Power on, working, Aaron.
Sorry to interrupt, but you wanted a microphone. I might. Yeah, one is he just.
This is great.
Yeah, this says an on-off switch. I just turned it on. I apologize for interrupting.
No problem. So more thank you for our technical. So the General Assembly decided that it was not a good idea for a number of reasons, which I mean, it's a very, very complex story, as you can imagine. For the legal board of the Presbyterian Church USA to be the same as the Presbyterian Mission Agency Board. And so they split that out and made another agency called the Administrative Services Group, or also called the ACORP. And so if you can see up there, you can see the Office of the General Assembly, and then you can see the Presbyterian Mission Agency, and then the green is the ACORP, or the Administrative Services Group. Here's why I did not print this for you, and it is really, I haven't talked about this with our national people. They may have a very different story than you. The ACORP is there is green, and it's listed as another entity, not an agency of the General Assembly. The board of the ACORP is the legal board of the PCUSA. It is an agency. It is the PCUSA. I mean, like, it should be in red up there. It should not be, it's not some other random entity. It is the legal board of the PCUSA. And I think it's important for you all to know that. Presbyterian Mission Agency is listed as a board. They do call themselves a board. They are not a legal board. They report to the board of the PCUSA, which is the ACORP board. The Office of the General Assembly is the subject of the committee. It's the committee on the Office of the General Assembly. They report to the ACORP board. Like they are not separate legal entities. And you all ought to know that as you go in. The legal entity that is the legal entity of the PCUSA is the board of the ACORP, or the Administrative Services Group. And so now in Louisville, we have not two agencies, but three agencies in the same, and soon we're going to go back to two. And they are still trying to figure all that out. And one of your jobs as a General Assembly will be to hear a report of how all that's going. It has been a messy and significant journey for that to happen for our denomination, because people get used to the way things are. And you'll be a part of and one of your committees will hear a report from the Unification Commission that is dealing with that. So those, when people say, I called Louisville, or Louisville did this, right? I mean, when they say those words, which we often say, we often mean either the Office of the General Assembly or the Presbyterian Mission Agency, which are not the same thing. They never mean ACORP because who even knows that exists, right? So for you all to know that they're distinct, they're coming together, I think that's helpful for you. Let me go back to the Presbyterian Mission Agency. The Presbyterian Mission Agency is in charge of our mission efforts. So when you hear about mission coworkers overseas, when you hear about the Young Adult Volunteer Program, when you hear about the special offerings, all that stuff is under the Presbyterian Mission Agency. So that's, again, and if you want more distinction, I mean, you can go online and see how that's helpful. It's a little bit of a standing joke among big council leaders. We don't actually go to the denominational website to look for stuff. We Google it, and then we hope that it takes us to the right page on the national website. So they're working on. So again, I do want to be respectful of our national colleagues who work very, very hard. They did, I mean, like a lot of our systems in the church, they didn't make it, right? I mean, they inherited that, so they don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, the website's great. They wake up in the morning and think, gosh, you know, what do we do about this? So just we know about that, and you all will discover that as you probably if you go there and try to find information. I really, my flat out recommendation is what I do is if I want a policy that's an OGA policy, I Google something along the lines of Office of the General Assembly Constitutional Music on this, you know, whatever. And then Google's pretty good. But you know, they got a lot of information, right? They're actually really good for information. There are a number of other agencies of the denomination. The Board of Pensions is an agency of the denomination. You will hear a report from the Board of Pensions of the PCUSA. They are not located in Louisville. They're located, their offices are in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Their job, as many of us know, is twofold. It is to provide pension retirement benefits for pastors and other people who are part of their plan, and then medical benefits. Recently, they released the pricing, like on Wednesday, they released the pricing for drastic changes to our medical plan, which we knew were coming. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, you know, so, but the pricing actually came out on Wednesday. It seems likely to me that the Board of Pensions medical plan will be a topic of conversation at the General Assembly, he says in an understated way. So what's helpful for you all to know going in about a number of these agencies is that they are distinct legal entities. They are corporations. And they have boards of directors of those corporations. The General Assembly elects those boards of directors. So that's part of what you will do. And the General Assembly has often expansive, but always limited ways that they can provide direction to the agencies of the General Assembly. In other words, the Presbyterian Foundation is in charge of managing our endowment, right? And the General Assembly can't tell the Presbyterian Foundation to take all that money and use it in ways that the donors didn't intend it to use, right? I mean, like that's right. Like those are things the General Assembly can't do that because there are legal restrictions on those things, right? So there's expansive, but there also are limits to what a General Assembly can do. And it is like that with the Board of Pensions. The Board of Pensions has a firewall between the funds, between the pension and medical side. That's a legal thing. It's not like the General Assembly decided to do that and the General Assembly can undo it, right? Those are legal requirements in order to have certain designations about what it means to have a pension fund. And so the General Assembly can't tell the Board of Pensions, well, gosh, you've got $11 billion in retirement funds, you know, take the excess and use it for the medical. Like that wouldn't be legal for us to decide to do that. But there are things that a General Assembly can tell agencies to do. So that's the Board of Pensions. It'll bring a report. There's the Presbyterian Investment Loan Program, sometimes called PILP, sometimes called ILP because Investment Loan Program, sometimes called PILF, the Presbyterian Investment Loan Fund. Like just hear all that language. This is a separate legal entity. It is a fund. It's not actually all that well known. Because what it does is it holds funds And then it loans them out to churches at a discount rate so that churches can do building programs with the support of the denomination. It's an idea that we had as a denomination that we would use to support congregation doing building, rebuilding, renovation things. You'll hear a report from them as well. There is the Presbyterian Publishing Corporation. So again, that's if you bought a book by Westminster John Knox Press, you bought something, right? I mean, when it goes out, it's called Westminster John Knox Press, and the back end, it's called Presbyterian Publishing Corporation. They also have an imprint called Flyover Books or Flyway, I can't remember it now. There's more children's books. They do our curriculum publishing, and you'll hear a report from them as well, and provide whatever direction the General Assembly wants to provide for them. We have the Presbyterian Foundation. Presbyterian Foundation is located close to Louisville in Indiana, but they're again a separate legal entity. They have separate offices. They're not in the Louisville offices. Their job is to manage the funds of the PCUSA. They are the legal holder of the restricted funds of the Presbyterian Church USA, which are massive. I mean, like 500, 600. $1 million. It's a lot of funds that they hold and manage for the benefit of the PCUSA. They also manage funds for other PCUSA entities. So local congregations have funds with them. And so, so there aren't just the PCUSA, but that's what they do. And for your purview, you'll be thinking about what they do for that as well as other things. They also have an investment company called the New Covenant Trust Company that holds and manages funds that aren't endowment funds. The foundation is a foundation, and so they do non-endowment funds. They will bring a report that you'll hear about what they are doing. Again, you provide direction for them within legal parameters. I mean, you can't tell them to sell all the foundation funds and do something else that wouldn't be legally proper with them, but you certainly can provide direction for them. And then it's also good for you to know Presbyterian Women, which many of our churches have, also has a national organization. That national organization is not an agency of the General Assembly. It's its own separate legal body. It has some legal arrangements with the PCUSA and actually has offices in the Louisville office. And for maybe you cover this, I'm not sure how they report to the General Assembly. It just occurred to me that would be good for me to look that up. But I mean, it's probably just telling you that like that doesn't come to our minds because they don't. They exist with, but also a little bit outside of kind of some of our legal structures. That they'll be president, General Assembly, and you certainly, as a General Assembly, have a relationship with them. I think there's an overview of our national agencies, and I think now I'm going to do two things. One is, Forrest, if there's anything you'd like to add, I'd certainly welcome that. And then Hunter Farrell is here. Hunter Farrell was our director of world missions, and Hunter, I'm having a very similar experience when I was an associate pastor and I preached for the president of a seminary, who was part of the congregation I preached for. Like every Sunday I preached, which wasn't on at all. I'd get up and be like, what he thinks of what I'm saying. You know what I mean? So far, I'll just notice this landscape well. So far, I would invite you if there's something that you would add or fill in. I certainly would just welcome your voice into that. But first, let me start with you and anything that you want to add or fill in.
I think it would be fun for the group to hear why we were here.
Yes. So in the 1800s, when we became it was decided to incorporate. Here's the name of the corporation. The Presbyterian Church USA, comma, a corporation. And so when they formed this new entity, they said, we'll call it the A Corp. That's why. So for some, and actually, I would open this up to more of you too. For some of us, maybe you've been around. Honestly, some of you could have been a board member, right? I don't really know who's in the room. You could have been a board member for one of these organizations. You want to kind of flesh out what that organization does. We've got some state clerks and EPs in the room. What's other helpful information for our General Assembly commissioners to have as they kind of are thinking and sitting in their meetings? And or questions that this raises for you. And just some new information. Some of you are nodding. Enough of you are nodding that it seems like it's helpful. I mean, because we're always testing, like, is this good? Because It's actually been a while since the Synod, this is something that we meant to say at the beginning, it's been a while since the Synod did GA commissioner training. And it's been even longer than that since Forrest and I did Synod and commissioner training for the Synod, because neither one of us have ever done it before. So as we've been together, Forrest and I were like, I mean, honestly, we're like, hey, this will be better next time, because we'll have to learn how to do it. So, all right, thank you all.
You know you've got talent in front of you when he can make the organizational structure of a large company seem entertaining, right? That's, there's skill there. Okay, so Michael has sort of outlined the broad structure of the denomination as it functions day in, day out, 365 days a year. What I'm going to do is give you the broad structure of this particular gathering of the General Assembly that you're going to be a part of this summer. So that you can figure out how you fit into that. One of the questions you answered already was what's the committee that you'll be serving on. I'm going to give you the big picture of all the committees that are at work. And then in particular, through the lens of the tool that you will want to become very comfortable with very quickly, because it's how you're going to be able to inject your either your action goals or your opinion goals, as the case may be, that everything is going to route through this. So, Mike, if you will pull up PC Biz, and if anybody is online right now in the room, you are welcome to follow along by pulling this up as well. It's pc-biz.org.
Or in my world, I just always Google PC Biz space PC USA, and it brings me to the right place.
Yeah,
I like to never remember.
just use Google if you want to. All right, yeah, so this is a good place for us to begin, where things are kind of blank. Okay, those of you, yeah, okay, I'm gonna watch.
Is that the same as my GA?
No. Yeah, that's a great question, Bob. There's multiple websites for you all to kind of get on your landscape. The MyGA is to register, I think. This is where you're gonna apply for
And
this.
it may be that you can route through MyGA to PC Biz in order to get a version of PC Biz that you are specially credentialed on, which will allow you behind some doors that we're not going to go behind today. Because I don't at least yet have those credentials for myself. Okay, those of you who are looking at laptops, do you see a screen? Whoop,
Yeah, well, so I was just gonna show you that if you simply Google PC Biz.
Okay.
The first thing that comes up is this PC Biz, and there you go.
all right, so mostly a blank screen. Let's, for the sake of kind of the purpose of this conversation today, go to committees, which is in nearly the upper left-hand corner there. Forgive my tremor. Okay, now on the slightly lower upper left, you want this to read 226th General Assembly 2024, meaning 2024 this year. If you're wanting to look at the business of old General Assemblies, you can go all the way back to the early 2000s. All of it's there. That is now the official record of the General Assembly. They don't print these in books anymore for the forms of the minutes. All of the minutes are just online. And if you really want to wade into it, be my guest. On the other side, select a committee. This is the organization of the committee structure for this coming General Assembly. That organization changes for every General Assembly because it comes in the form of the moderators of the previous General Assembly making recommendations to the next General Assembly around how the business should be organized. One of the key principles here.
Motion carried.
One of the key principles here is that every single thing that the General Assembly ends up deciding is decided by elected people. So if you are a commissioner who has been elected by your presbytery, you have power to make a vote happen in the assembly. The people who become moderators of General Assembly are people who were elected by their presbytery to serve as commissioners of General Assembly. The people who get to approve the organizational structure of the committees of the next General Assembly at the recommendation of the elected moderators from the previous General Assembly are the leadership team of the coming General Assembly. And those people are people who were elected by their presbyteries to serve as commissioners to this coming General Assembly, and then were appointed by the elected people who are moderators of the General Assembly. Do you hear the pattern here that I'm trying to emphasize? None of this is done by paid Louisville staff. And none of this is done by operatives behind the scenes who do not have the authority of the presbytery election behind them. All of this, the only kind of people who actually have the power to make it happen are people who have been elected by their presbyteries.
And
Thank you, sir. So just this past week, actually, as a matter of fact, the group called Committee One, which is composed of the moderators and vice moderators of each of the proposed committees, got together and under the leadership of the moderator of the previous General Assembly, voted to make this organizational structure official. And then, before the week was over, they voted to take all of the items of business that had come to the General Assembly from either the presbyteries or from the agencies, as Michael mentioned a little while ago, and cascade them into various committees as seemed appropriate. And so let's give an example of this. Mike, why don't you pull up polity, just because that one is kind of fun. Okay, so now in this block here, that's the business that Committee One voted to give to the Polity Committee in order for them to have work to do in the course of this coming General Assembly. This is actually unusually small for the Polity Committee because, and part of what happened here is in the past, sometimes Committee One has given any change to the Book of Order to the Polity Committee. Just dumped it all in there, right? And so they're, instead of like half of a page, they had 3 pages worth of business. This time around, Committee One chose to take certain items that are changes to the Book of Order and put them topically into spaces in committees where it kind of makes sense. So for instance, if there was a change that had to do with the way the terms of call are mandated, that would fall potentially under mid-councils because presbyteries are the ones that get to decide what the minimum terms of call are. And so if the Book of Order is now saying this will be a minimum term of call, presbyteries don't get a say in that any longer except to maybe make that minimum higher, then we're going to put that in a place where it's most topically sensible. That's why polity doesn't have as much. But this is then how your business goes. So, excuse me. I strongly encourage you, when you are in the presence of your computer and the internet, to go to your committee on PCBiz and take a look at these business items in order to familiarize yourself with what you're going to be dealing with when the committee meets on Zoom. Mike, will you, Will you do number 4? And then scroll to fill up the screen. This is the kind of thing that you will normally see when you're looking at the items of business. What's happened is you have those 7 to 10 things, and now we're exploding one of them out into its full detail. So it begins then with the recommendation, the people bringing the overture to change this part of the book of order this is how we want it to be changed, and this is the language. Then below, they have the full explanation for why they think it ought to be changed. If you keep on scrolling, you'll see who concurred with that. Now go ahead and go back up to the header, if you will, Mike. You'll notice, for instance, I can take this with me. You'll notice, for instance, here that there are 2 other presbyteries besides the one that brought the overture that say, this is a good thing, we think this ought to happen. It comes from the sponsor there, Charleston Atlantic Presbytery, and type GA full consideration means that before all of this is said and done, it's going to have to route through a committee to the GA plenary unto a final decision. The committee may decide along the way that they're going to recommend to plenary that something different happen than what is here. But something's going to have to be done with this request. That is one of the ways, actually, the General Assembly is different than session or presbytery in an important respect. All of the business that comes before the assembly has to be dealt with by the assembly before the assembly is over. There is no postponing this, or at least no ignoring it. Let me put it that way, because one of the ways to deal with an item of business could be to say, we're going to postpone this to the next assembly and make them deal with it. The thing is, that almost never happens. But the key thing is you can't just decide we're going to walk away from this one and not have anything to do with it. It may be that there are 2 items of business that are so similar to one another that the action of the assembly on one of the items is to say, we are going to address this item, and then we're going to address item B as having been answered by the assembly's action on item A. But that's still taking care of it. And so what you'll see happen, scroll back up a little bit. You see some things that aren't necessarily letters from the distance you're looking at, but are little black dots that I will tell you they are letters. This is CA, and this is AA. CA stands for committee action, and AA stands for assembly action. As the week progresses, more and more of these business items will end up with a green check mark next to them, which means that under CA, when that happens, the committee has acted and is ready for the item to proceed forward to the assembly as a whole. When the AA gets a green check, it means that the assembly has dealt with it and it's done and gone. And we'll see what happens next. What happens next may be that the Office of the General Assembly has more work to do. What may happen next is that it goes back to the presbyteries for a vote on a change to the book of order. But it means that the assembly as an assembly is finished with it. Let me see if there was anything else under PC bills.
I believe that link here takes you right to the page.
Oh, yes, okay.
So if you want to catalog that. Like if you're on that committee, right?
Right.
And we're just gonna go right to that page without going through all the steps that we just did.
Right, that's helpful. You've raised another one, Mike, as well. So yeah, you've got the links here, especially if you want to sort of tab your links and keep them open and figure out what you're taking care of. The other thing is that what you might see in the header, and I don't have a good example of this right now, unless you do.
I'll see if I can find one.
Okay, is sometimes over here, you'll see a link that has a PDF at the end of the link. Those PDFs are usually either reports from entities of the General Assembly that are expanded detail on the business item. It may be, for instance, that one of the offices of the Office of the General Assembly was asked to do work and come back with a recommendation. Those recommendations are often very long. Well, the recommendation itself isn't very long, but the detail behind the recommendation and the work that was done will be spelled out in a report that's quite long. You can find that report then in the PDF. And that's useful for you if, when you're doing your own thinking about, is this a good idea or a bad idea, you might start having questions. That's a good place to go to then decide, are my questions being answered, or are there questions here that I need to raise that haven't been addressed in the paperwork so far? Strategically, what I would recommend to you is that you use PC-Biz in the following way. Start with your committee. Make sure that you are well-versed in what is coming before your committee, because that is going to be the place where you have the greatest opportunity for influence. Once you have taken the time to do that, then look around the rest of PC-Biz on other committees, look at titles of items of business, see what catches your attention. Listen to the chatter out there in Presbyverse and think, are there other things that I want to be ready for that aren't going to come to my own committee, but may come to the plenary in such a way that I want to be at the microphone when the gavel drops? Then spend your time on those. Then browse over the rest just to make sure you know the lay of the land. If you decide to try to read the Bible starting at Genesis 1:1 and reading through to Revelation 20, I've lost track, 22? Are there 22 chapters or 21 chapters in Revelation? You're gonna get bogged down just like most Bible readers get bogged down. Same way if you try to do it in sequence with PC-Biz. Read strategically, plan strategically, use your time.
And of course,
Yeah,
not all businesses in there yet. Is that, I mean, just so, right, that's,
correct.
just so you all know that, right? More could come here.
Yeah. The polity committee is probably full.
Right.
Because of the deadlines involved in getting changes to the book of order proposed. Some things have closer deadlines to the moment the General Assembly starts, which means that more stuff is going to be rolling in. Usually those closer deadlines are because historically the assemblies have come to the conclusion that this is just kind of a gimme. You know, if there's a president of a theological seminary that is being approved, but the president's already been serving for the last 2 years, it's probably not going to be something that's a hot issue. People are gonna be like, yeah, sure, let them serve. Which means that that's going to arrive later. I'm not gonna talk about other agencies and what might come out of those because the Board of Pensions this year is a little bit different. There may be some last minute energy that really shows up there. We'll talk about that. How are we doing? Oh, yeah, right on schedule. So, Michael, any wisdom that?
Maybe could you talk about, I mean, I was like the advisory committee of the Constitution, ASWA, like other people that they might see information from other.
Yeah, so one of the things that you will not have seen yet here on PC-Biz, but will be coming, part of the deal with certain timeframes, it has to arrive so that advisory committees have the chance to then weigh in on it in order to give advice. So as time goes on, you'll see some of the advice start to populate underneath those items of business. Like it goes recommendation, rationale, and then the next section will read advice from the advisory committee on the Constitution. And that group then will, it's required to give advice to all of you on anything that has constitutional implications. Changes to the Book of Order are obvious ones, but then sometimes there are actions that the General Assembly could take that aren't changes to the Book of Order, but those actions have constitutional waterfalls. And that means that the ACC has to step in and say, you know, if you do this, that's how it relates to what's going on in this portion of the Book of Order. So think about that before you do it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you need to be aware. AC SWAP is another acronym that you'll hear talked out that way. It stands for the Video and Social Witness Policy. They provide us an analogous kind of advice. Instead of talking about what are the constitutional implications of a given action of the GA, they will bring advice saying, for this particular action item, these are the social witness implications that we see of that action. If you choose to say this, say about Israel, this is how your statement about Israel relates to positions of the General Assembly from years gone by, and what it might mean for both justice relationships across denominations and interfaith relationships, as the case may be. That's where social witness policy is. The one other kind of group that you'll see populating that space are called advocacy groups, as opposed to advisory groups. Some are, we can't tell you what we think, we can only tell you what we think is wise. And then advocacy groups are the ones that can say, we're going to tell you what we think is right. And those might be, for instance, women and gender justice kind of groups. REAC is a recently named one, which stands for the Racial Equality Advisory Group. Did I get that right? I'm sorry, Racial Equality Advocacy Group. Sometimes it's tricky. Even having served on the advisory committee on the Constitution, I get confused on which is an advocacy group and which is an advisory group. The reality is that both of them are telling you what they think. And you then weigh the input on those as you are thinking about the wisdom of the action in and of itself. Yeah, thanks for thinking about that. That's going to be showing up. So keep an eye. When you think you're finished your reading, go back a week later, you'll find that happened because there's more reading. Any other, again, sort of wisdom from the folks who've been around on this and dealt with it before, and or questions from folks who are like, now that you've seen it, it's like, oh my goodness, how does this work? Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned Presby verse. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's not.
So it's in cyberspace.
It's like cyberspace.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Whatever people on Twitter are saying about the PCUSA.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not on social media, so that probably informs my questions.
No, it's, yeah, Presbyverse is not a thing. It's just sort of what is the universe of Presbyterian chatter going on out there in all of the spaces where it goes on.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
One of the things I am sensing, maybe like kind of empathetically, I'm reliving the last 10 years of my life where like every GA I'm like, oh, those like kind of this expanding body of knowledge that it takes to navigate. This is a pretty complex world. And it needs to be. I mean, I don't say that apologetically, like it is just as complex. So as you all are building capacity for this, I think you have a number of resources available to you. I mean, you've got your own investigation, right? Your own learning. You also likely have a state clerk and an executive presbyter or some kind of presbytery leadership. So those people are to be there to help you understand stuff, right? For you to go to and say, what about this? What's going on? Tell me more of this. I mean, they're in Presbyterian. Like this is where we live and do stuff. There are people who went to General Assembly from your Presbyterian previous years. So they're a resource for you all, and we're a resource. I mean, we're, and for many of us, our mid-council leaders will be at the plenary. I mean, like physically present. So those people will be there. I have found myself as a presbytery sitting clerk, you know, sitting down and talking with commissioners, and they said to me, all right, here's what I want to have happen. And it's my job to help them figure that out. It's not my job. I'm not an advisory committee or an advocacy committee at that point, right? Like I could be like, I would not vote for this. But that's not right, but that's not what I say to the person. When I say to the person who's, oh, right, like here are your options. So you've got resources to help you in this responsibility.
So we'll talk more around strategies when we come back from the break, but Michael has named a critical value, which is the most powerful question you can ask at any point in those 2 weeks is, how can I fill in the blank, right? Do not let your ignorance of the system interfere with your ability to get done what you want to get done. Find somebody who can give you the way to get done what you want to get done. Whether that way is advocacy, whether that way is parliamentary procedure, whatever it might be, start with how can I do this? And then have people figure out with you and for you who the one is that can give you that answer. Any other questions? We are at our break otherwise, but I don't want to leave you swimming more than I already am. Going once, twice. All right, we'll see you back up here. Has been and is glad to be up in front talking about something from General Assembly. Good, this is a win. All right, so far. So 2 conversations coming up next. One that I'm going to host, and then Michael and I are going to trade places. One that he's going to host. The first one, both of these deal with sort of how to make your voice heard and at the same time not make lifetime enemies. There is a balancing act as far as that's concerned when it comes to a group of several hundred people. So the first conversation will focus around how do you do that within a committee when a committee is somewhere between 30 and 100 people. And then the second round that Michael is going to host is how do you do that in relation to the plenary floor when there are maybe about 8 microphones around the floor and again, several hundred people in the room, all of whom probably would like an opportunity to speak. But as you can imagine, some people are more fond of hearing their own voice than others. So those are the things we're going to do in turn. So the first one is if you have either as an observer or as an advisory delegate or as a commissioner, experienced committee dynamics. The question becomes, what are the kind of things that you have seen people do that have been most helpful in them getting their goals met, their individual goals, but then also what has been most helpful that they have done that has helped the committee as a committee get its work done in the course of the couple of days that they have for that to happen. Now, recognizing that this is the first time for many of you that a committee will be a Zoom experience rather than a personal experience, but hopefully some of those strategies in interpersonal activity will translate. So what has been, let's start with the question, where have you seen people acting in ways that their goals for the assembly vis-a-vis the committee have been fulfilled by the way that they have interacted with the committee? And raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you if and when a thought arises.
Okay, I'm Don Wilson. I'm the general presbyter for Kissimmee Presbyterian. I'm going to be one of the delegates going to this General Assembly for the first time. But I have worked, as you can tell, on many different occasions with General Assembly. back at Portland General Assembly, I can't remember the exact year, there was a overture that I actually worked with Chris Isco on in terms of military chaplains. At the time, I was on the Associate Director for the Presbyterian Council on Chaplains and Military Personnel. We worked for 2 years. And the committee that was working on it was given the wrong draft of the measure. It was very heartbreaking in that Chris and I were looking at each other, trying to figure out what was going on, and we discovered that they had lost 2 years worth of work. So what I'm going to say is listen to the advisors who have been working on these things, because they've not been working, they've thought of these things that are going to be coming before you have been working on for years. They really have been hammered out by people who have been in dialogue, doing committee work, going around visiting places, visiting, in our case, military chaplains on the issue of the just war and war position of the church and that kind of stuff. And so it was very valuable, I think, for the committee to listen to the people who had done the homework. And that's what I'm going to also say is I think the people who have been successful in committee are those who have prepared themselves. Jared and I were just talking about this a second ago. I'm actually putting out all of the statements, all the overtures, and I'm putting it into a notebook. And I'm highlighting things, and I'm asking myself questions about those things. And I will be, after this meeting, going back and researching those issues online and seeing what I can discover and try to talk to people as well. Do some of that committee work that I did for the overture that went there, but also to do the homework now of understanding how that overture came into being, that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Keep the microphone. No, hold on to it because I want to use something you just said for the sake of getting a piece of information out there by asking you a question. Okay, this is a strategy of General Assembly, by the way. You ask a question that you know the answer to and then have the expert answer it on your behalf. Don, can you speak a little more to the group about the kind of resource people that will be in front of the committee at various times around a particular item of business?
So Chris was on theology and worship and a couple other different things. It's a part of the Presbyterian Mission Agency. And his expertise was on basically war policy and that kind of stuff. Where how do we interact with just war, or do we abandon just war and go to other things in terms of trying to understand how we advocate for peace in the world? And so he was an expert. He had a group that he worked with on that overture that was adopted by the General Assembly, by the way. And they do research and stuff. So
Okay,
that
one is subject matter experts.
yeah.
Okay,
So that's critical for you to know that there are those people who will be in front of you. In our case, when we met before we were working on this, we actually had 7 chaplains who were present to talk about it. So not all 7 of us spoke, but we were all sitting there on military uniforms and ready to speak to the subject matter about how the military pastors help in the peace process, which is real critical to that particular overture. So
okay, so a second group would be informational.
people affected by it.
Okay, yeah, and maybe can I use the word advocates there? So when it comes from presbyteries, we call them overture advocates. The presbytery can actually pay to send somebody to speak on behalf of their overture. But, you know, for instance, from the military chaplains, there would be advocates from the chaplains who would come and say, this is why this matters to the people that I'm speaking on behalf of. Okay, and I think there's 1/3 group, which would be the staff.
Yeah, well, that's good. Chris was staff person.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Louisville staff.
Little, he was,
Well, Chris is.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
he was.
Okay, thank
He was
you.
the person leading it. Actually, he was the one, the person for the global staff, in his case, the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Yeah. He was a paid expert who does this at General Assembly, deals with it on a daily basis, really works in this particular area. And basically helps pull all of us together to be in front of the committees.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Don. Other comments about places or people you've seen who have been effective in getting their goals met by way of the committee? Rhonda.
Yeah. Am I muted? Wait a minute.
Oh, you're good.
I was, a commissioner in 2012 in Pittsburgh. And there are two points here. I mean, one is the moderator of the committee is the person in charge of the committee. Some of you are strong leaders in your own context. Don't try to take over the committee. And it's even if the moderator is not particularly skilled, let the moderator be the moderator. That said, sometimes a committee sort of gets stuck and starts sort of turning in circles, and it's clear that they're not going to move forward on a particular topic. At that point, it's helpful for some of you with leadership tendencies to volunteer to work with a small group during a break, to develop a motion or something that can get the committee unstuck, and then bring it back, because sometimes it's clear that you're not going to move forward from this. So I would just encourage you to do that if you see the opportunity.
Thank you, Rhonda. Does anybody want to supplement what Rhonda just said?
Zach, I would like to, yeah. So there will be, I mean, just remember, your committees are going to be online, right? So it'll be the first time that we have collectively done that. So that'll just be part of the dynamic of us working in the committee together this time. If we were all in a room, it would be a room about this size, and it would be set up either in a U or in lines, but you can imagine between 35 and 100 people trying to work together to make a decision. But so that's how many people will be online with you all. There's 4 people who are responsible. There's a moderator and a vice moderator. They are General Assembly commissioners like you that have been recommended by somebody, maybe themselves, and then have been placed in that position as far as said by the previous moderators whose job it is to do that. Then there's a committee parliamentarian. Every committee has a committee parliamentarian. That's a volunteer job. It's a person who's been asked to do it by the Office of the General Assembly. Often it is a stated clerk or somebody who's like done parliamentary procedure. They may well be a really good friend to you on that. In other words, honestly, the moderator and the vice moderator, they're like you, they're volunteers. It might be their first time working with a group that big. They may have strong opinions about what happens. I mean, they're dealing with all that kind of stuff. The committee parliamentarian's job is to be a committee parliamentarian, and so they're a resource to you all. And then there's another person called the committee assistant. And the committee assistant's job is to like get the right person in the room. And honestly, I mean, again, they'd be the person here that would be like, it's a little cold in here, can you do something about it? Right? They're that person. So that person's around, their job is to help the committee. And we've tried to do something about that. We're working on that, by the way. So the committee assistant's on that. So, as I was thinking, I've been a commissioner, I've been a committee parliamentarian, and I've been a state clerk at a General Assembly. As a committee member, I would just say, don't, like, if there's something that you want to have happen, there's probably a way to get it in front of the committee. And so don't sit back, you know, if the committee says no, I mean, they probably said no. Like, this is not a session. This isn't, you raise your hand again, you say, come on, people, like, you all know me, you trust me, like, right, like, it's like, they'll have moved on. At the General Assembly that I was a commissioner to, I actually, in my committee, ended up bringing a minority report that went to the floor of the General Assembly. I mean, so that stuff happens, right? And there are just ways to do things that, you know, there are people around to help you do those things. As a state clerk, I remember helping a commissioner both write something, like they came, you know, like I'm an independent person, right, like, you know, and it was about Israel, Palestine. I don't remember what it was about. You know, but it really meant but there's like, so there's people around, like if you got, if it matters, find somebody who's a process person that can help you with that. And then, I should say, as a state clerk, another thing that I've done is we have had commissioners who really cared about what was going on in another committee. And maybe they wanted either to know about that or they wanted to speak to that. And you don't have the same rights in another committee that you've got in your own committee, but there's open times where you can go and speak. And like, I've done stuff like sit in a committee and been like, oh, it's almost time for the open people, you know, and then I text the person and she came from the committee she was in over there, right? So again, there's like, I just think as you kind of are looking at lay of the land, you've got resources.
Vicky?
I was just gonna say, there's one thing that I think bothers everybody when you're in committee, and that is the person who sits there and has an opinion but doesn't listen and then stands up and repeats something somebody else said. So if you don't want to be that annoying person, don't repeat what somebody else just said.
Yeah, which means paying attention. I want to jump on to Rhonda's comment a little further. I'm doing a bit of imagining here because of Zoom, not having done GA committees on Zoom before, but yes, it is probable that in order to seek recognition from the moderator, you will need to not just go like this, but actually be clicking your raise hand feature, right? And that'll bump your square up into the upper left-hand corner, and then the moderator can work their way through those squares. If it is the case that Rhonda is right, and your committee moderator is less of a leader than you think they ought to be, I expect that everybody in this room here has worked with a person as a leader who is less of a leader than you thought they ought to be. And you have skills that you already developed in how to get things done in spite of or by way of that person's weaknesses. Think about that and figure out how you might do that again. The key thing is never chop off that person's leadership. That will only make you look bad. But anything sort of like, Mr. Moderator, I wonder if ... can go a long ways toward leaving them with the authority to do something or not do something, but you opening up their possibilities on their behalf. I'll go ahead and save some other thoughts that I have for when the questions might arise. Other ones, especially as far as, like, you know, Nikki has raised this wonderful thing about how to shoot yourself in the foot, right? If you have a goal to get the job done so that it comes out of committee in such a way that it's more likely to end up the way you want at the assembly, have you seen people be effective in that respect, and what does that look like? And now I'm going to go ahead, since Nikki sort of gave me permission, right? And I'm going to also say, how have you seen people shrink the chances that they will get a good response by way of their activity?
It's been a number of years since I've been on a committee or in person in an assembly, but I was on polity when I was, and once in a while you have somebody that comes up on a specific issue, they speak and they're basically planting their flag in the ground. It's my way or the highway. You get that from the wording, the body language, all that kind of stuff. That's not the way to do it as far as I'm concerned. And if we really believe that God speaks through the gathered collective body, great, express your thoughts, your concerns, but be willing to listen to the other people in the room who are also perhaps speaking for God, so that you can come to a decision that's the best one, not necessarily your one, but the best. I've seen a couple of people do that. You can see the tension in the room just change when you hear something like that. It'll be interesting to see how this works with committees being online this time around. How you kind of, quote, read the screen instead of the room. The interactions between people on committees and during breaks and things like that make a big difference in the success of that process. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, good thought, Mike. And that then comes back to listening as well, doesn't it? Where the response is sort of, I heard what you just said, and here are my thoughts about what you just said, as well as my thoughts of what's going forward. Yeah,
Oh, no, I was gonna point.
oh, you're signaling to get Rhonda's attention. Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, Rhonda.
Oh, I would agree with Mike, that it's important to let everybody else speak and really listen to what they're saying. Some people are going to know a lot about the topic and others are going to be sort of clueless, and that's okay. The thing about that's really wonderful about going to General Assembly is it's really eye-opening to hear how other people in other parts of the country view particular issues. And so be respectful of that. They're coming from all over the denomination. They have their own regional and cultural and theological perspectives, and they may be very different from yours. And don't just write them off. And like Mike said, stick your own flag in the ground and say this is right and everybody else is wrong. And that said, know your own triggers. Some committee business is very controversial, and it can be politically or theologically fraught. And be prepared to disagree with grace and respect, and know that, you know, some topics are very triggering to your getting angry or you know, anxious, and it's just good to know that ahead of time.
Thank you. All right, let's turn the question in, and some of this has already happened. So to the degree that it has, we're great, you know, it doesn't have to be a chop, chop, chop kind of thing. Are there in particular strategies that you've seen people exercise that aren't so much about getting their goals met as helping the committee move along for the purpose of getting to the end and not being up really late halfway through the assembly trying to get finished? And Rhonda raised one of those already. Yeah, Nikki.
So I think this is where those good leaders come in to place. For me and the committee that I served on, and I don't even remember what it was, but there were those times where it seemed like we were getting to an impasse and it wasn't moving along. And you could say, this is what I think I hear this side saying, and this is what I think I hear this side saying, so that everybody's clear. And then it gives people the opportunity to say, no, that's not actually what's being said. And it sort of starts the conversation and reinitiates it. Just a strategy from my background.
Yeah. Hunter.
Thanks. I think these are great strategies. And to build on what you're saying, in the word, I would just summarize this, the word anticipate, because it is so difficult with 25 to 100 people in the room together. It's going to be even more difficult when we're on the screen together. There'll be moments where, so we hear these two positions that are sort of crystallized, and so there's two options. If you can anticipate it and say, what's a way through this? Could we offer this that would be bringing together those two positions? Or we need to take some of the most troublesome features of position A out and see if we can crystallize around something that would be acceptable to a larger group within this committee. So you're kind of doing a read of the room and anticipating. People who come with language and say, "Look, I would offer this." That gets onto the floor immediately, that people then begin to work on that as opposed to the feelings in the room. So if you can anticipate, it's really helpful, just provide some language. Because we get stuck in the kind of the feeling level and it's like, okay, everybody's united in their opposition to both these extreme positions. So what's some language that'll work for us in this room? On screen, please.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask a favor. Will you pass the microphone to Mary? Mary, I'd like to hear, you told us that in Portland 8 years ago, you were a young adult advisory delegate. So that means that you had voice and vote and power to make motions within the committee, just not on the plenary floor. But from your seat on the bus, what kind of strategies did you find yourself leaning into for the sake of being heard, when it's possible sometimes that young adult advisory delegates get the sort of attention of, yeah, we're glad you're here, now just sit down and mind your own business, let the old people do what they know how to do. Any thoughts on being effective from that space?
So, being effective as a young adult advisory delegate, since we were an advisory delegate, we had voice, but we didn't have a vote whenever it came to plenary, but we did have a vote in committee. So in committee, I've tried to read ahead on all of the information that came for our committee. I was on, we called it the acronyms committee, but it was like Presbyterian loans.
PPC.
Yep.
Board of Pensions, Bill, all reported.
Yep, all of the boards and trustees is what we went over. So it wasn't a very hard topics that anybody had anything to say about, really. But being
I was your committee parliamentarian.
Glad you told you that first.
Yeah.
I don't know why the committee was so dysfunctional.
Yeah. So learning how to interact, most of the people who were on our committee, they were pretty accepting of what we had to say. We didn't have a lot of earth shaking things to go over, but the commissioner from Lehigh, he knew me beforehand, and he was very open to what I had to say. So as a young adult, it was trying to figure out how to meet the older commissioners where they were, and to see, okay, this person, you have to kind of give them some respect, and then they'll hear you. Whereas with interacting with some other people, they were just like, okay, I'm just gonna hear what you have to say straight out.
Okay, yeah, it goes back to reading the room.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw in one more thing and then I want to switch places with you, so we move along. So for the sake of the committees, a thing to remember here is there are two roles where people can be very opinionated, the occupiers of the role can have strong opinions, and they're not allowed to say anything about them unless they're asked. One role is the staff person who is assigned to that committee from the Office of the General Assembly or from PMA. They may know a ton about the business that's going on, but because they're not elected, right, they are not allowed to weigh in, but you can ask them. And if you have a read on what they're thinking and they're going in the direction you want the group to go, a well-placed question can swing that thing hard because they may have something to say that wouldn't have occurred to a commissioner. The other person in the room, and this is a little different probably than your experience at Presbytery may be, the parliamentarian is not allowed to speak up without being asked. The closest thing that a parliamentarian can do is send a post-it note to the moderator saying, you know, pull out now. Right? But the parliamentarian has to make the moderator look good at all times. And so if you see the parliamentary train going off the tracks, because you know your stuff, right? And you wonder why the parliamentarian isn't speaking up. It's because they can't. And then you, as a commissioner or an advisory delegate, may exercise the power of raising the question in order for them then to advise the moderator on ruling. Is it?
No.
Okay, yeah, all right. I think for the sake of the clock, it's time for us to switch and now talk about life in the plenary as opposed to life in.
Wait, Forrest, can I say one more thing?
No, question.
Oh, yeah, okay. Rhonda, after the person in the back of the room.
Okay,
We've got it.
As a first-time delegate, you're talking about going to committee and getting across your point and talking but you're not talking about, and I think everybody, including myself, need to know, what do we need to do as delegates to have an informative, established opinion of what we're going in for? You know what I'm talking about? Dawn and I were just talking about this earlier. There's a lot of homework that first-time delegates have to realize they've got to do, and nobody's addressed that yet.
Would somebody, yeah, I'm seeing it here, great.
So my name is Christina from the Upper Ohio Valley Presbytery. I was a commissioner in Portland, Oregon. The committee that I served on was environmental and which was very contentious that year. Frankly, I was a little bit nervous. But one of the things that helped me going forward was reading everything that was to come through my committee, as well as reading from various points of views. When I did not understand, I would speak to our stated clerk, or I would speak to somebody in my presbytery or other people as well to kind of help me flush out what the implications of the decisions being made, because to be honest with you, like I had no clue, you know, the wider aspect of the implications of the decisions being made. So I would encourage you to read everything that comes to your committee. And I would encourage you to read every PDF that speaks to or against, so that you coming into your committee are informed and have kind of an understanding, but also remain open to the work of the committee. Going into that, you may have a strong opinion or a view, but going out of that committee meeting, you very may, you know, might have at some point heard something or learned something that would lead you a different direction. So do your homework, be prepared, but also remain open.
Does that address what you were raising?
Yeah, what I really wanted to emphasize is first-time delegates is not just go and pick it all up. There's prep that you have to do. And I think that a lot of us, including myself, was totally unaware of until
It was a surprise.
a minute ago.
Yeah.
And I think all first timers have got to understand that you got to do some prep work.
Was there another hand at this table, or was it a hand on behalf of a hand? Okay, so Rhonda.
yeah, and I don't know if you've talked about this already, but committee members need to understand too that committee recommendations that have costs associated with them or financial implications, it's important to know that if your committee is recommending something that's going to cost the denomination to implement, that's going to impact per capita, because it has to be paid for somehow. And so it's just important to keep that in mind if you were, recommending, a commission or a committee or documents to be provided to the presbyteries, or whatever it is that you're recommending. There are financial implications, and that's when it goes to plenary. People are going to ask, how much is that going to cost, and is it worth that, and all of those kinds of things. So you just need to be aware of that.
Thank you. Okay, ready to switch?
Yeah. Hey, thank you all. So stand up, turn around. Sit back, no, turn the whole way around. Sit back down. You're now in plenary, all right? You're not in the committee anymore, you're in plenary, that's where you are. So, but before we switch on, one other committee thing that occurred to me that I thought I would want you all to be aware of is when your committee meets first, which I think is maybe even gonna happen later this month, to get to know one another, that will be just your committee. It won't be live streamed, and it's really designed for you all to build community in your committee. Once your committee goes live for business, you'll be live streamed. And so that, I think it's just, it was a little easier to be aware of that in a room, because it was like, they would be like, okay, now other people can come into the room. And honestly, for some of our committees, nobody else came into the room because they didn't really care. But for some, the environmental committee, there might have been like all of a sudden, all of a sudden there's like a wall in the back. And honestly, then they all left. Once you do something else, they all came back. But some of what you deal with, people will be watching. And the Presbyterian Outlook and Presbyterian News Service will write about it. And so you all do want to be, you want to be aware in those things. If you say something, it could show up as a quote. I mean, that probably goes to the tone, the approach, just kind of how you're coming across publicly, to be aware that you are in a public setting in those places. All right, we're in plenary now. And I thought this is the first time since 2018. Where was 2018? Oh, St. Louis. This will be the since St. Louis that plenary will be in person. So for those of you who have done an in-person plenary, I thought it might be helpful for all of us. What does it look like? Like, to help describe the room to this, to us, right? So we can just orient ourselves to what's it like to sit in plenary. Does the question make sense? All right, who wants to? Yeah.
So for Portland, Oregon, we had a big auditorium that we went to, and there were rows and rows and rows of tables with, I think about 4 aisles. They had microphones at the end of each aisle for people to come speak for or against whatever we were voting on. And you would have an assigned seat. So you're seated with the other delegates from your presbytery. That way you at least know the people around you. And your name tag will have, I think it contains where you're supposed to sit, but you have assigned seats.
Like L12, right? It'll say like.
Yeah, it'll say your seat L12, Q's G10. Everybody has their own spot. So whenever you first come into plenary, they'll have like a little gift bag for you.
Only if your presbytery staff's on top of it, so.
Yeah.
Do you hear that, Rhonda?
I'm on it.
So, whenever everybody comes in, you'll do worship at the beginning, before anything starts in the morning, and then we'll do a plenary session, then there'll be a break for lunch, and another plenary session, and then there'll be dinner, and another plenary session until about 9 o'clock, if the business doesn't run late. So as long as the moderators keep everything going pretty well, it should follow that schedule pretty tightly, but if there are a lot of people speaking to motions over and over and over again, then sometimes the moderator just has to cut it off and be like, okay, this is the last thing that we're talking about, so.
For or against.
Yes, they gave you a paddle to speak for or against a motion.
There were there's four colors in the past. There's green, what do you think green means? There's red, what do you think red means?
Against.
And then there's orange, and I think orange is like a point of order, and I think yellow was a question. I mean, again, don't hold me to those colors, but there's colors, and there might even have been another color. And that's so the moderator's got some electronic stuff going on, but the moderator could also look out and be like, I mean, if the moderator looks out and they're all green, then the moderator would be like, I think we're done. Like, we don't need, but if the moderator looks out and it's like, wow, it's half split between green and red, you know, like then maybe they decide that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people speaking about how the language should change from what the committee's recommending. So they'll say, maybe instead of this word, we should do that word instead, be more inclusive. And then you'll have somebody else saying, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of questions about language.
So maybe could somebody else tell us how far were you from the moderator and what were you looking at? Or more about the room. I mean, yeah, but I was fun. And tell us who you are, by the way, if you haven't introduced yourself, we want to learn who you are.
I'm Doug Orbaker from here in Northumberland Presbyterian.
Thanks for hosting us.
I didn't do it. Y'all set it up. Yeah, I was very near the back, but one of the things, the debate usually is very time limited. And I want to get up there and I want to tell this story and I'm going to go on. And ding, I've got 20 seconds left. If you're going to be debating on something, plan it out carefully, what you want to say, and get to your point real quickly, because you've only got one shot at it. So, and they will cut you off. Turn the microphone off.
David Paul, from Beaver Butler Presbyterian, said the other one, but we also had these little like gizmos, a calculator, didn't we? That was, you know, voting for or against it instant when they worked.
When they
most of the time.
I do not know how you will vote. I know that they will try to have some kind of electronic form of voting. They've changed, I mean, they've continued to upgrade whatever the system is, but that's.
Sure. And also there was so there's obviously a column going this way of tables, you know, heading towards the moderator, you know, where worship is, and et cetera. And then there was like this street back here, and then there was bleachers where like people with the lobby, lobbyists, I don't know what the right. Observers.
Yeah.
Yeah, peanut gallery, yeah. But that was all really neat and interesting, and that's all, that's it, describing it a little bit.
Yeah, good, thank you.
One piece of advice.
Yeah.
If they're set up like usual and the rows are long and you're stuck in the middle, there is significant space, but people bring bags and put them out and it's easy to trip. So if you're getting up to go over, for those of us who are a little bit more challenged and paying attention to when we're walking, myself included, I almost tripped and fell, so I'm giving that a piece of advice.
Yeah, thanks. It looks like Forrest.
I'll take some. So Michael, with regard to your question about layout, I want to talk from the point of view of the Presbyterian leadership.
Yeah, and tell us about the wall and access and stuff like that too.
Okay, so the commissioners are up front. You've got a dais where the powers that be sit up, and you're not allowed to go up on the dais, there are guards there. And then below that, in the front, are where the commissioners and the Young Adult Advisory Delegates sit. And that goes back probably about half of the length of a football field or so. And imagine inside a convention center space. So even for commissioners, your best view is most likely going to be on some major screens that are up with projection above where the speakers can really be seen. And so when it was mentioned a moment ago that if your time runs out, they'll turn off your microphone. It is literally a big enough space that you are suddenly mute. I mean, you cannot be heard in that space if they turn off your microphone. So it is the ultimate power in causing somebody to no longer have voice. I mean, so, right, that's what you're gonna look like on the big screen. Behind the commissioner space is a curtain that's about waist high. And there are a couple of entryways where that curtain opens up, their gates essentially. But there are guards at those gates. And if you are not wearing, well, if a person, you all will be wearing the right colored name tag.
But it means you gotta have your name tag, you have to
But
have your
but
name
if
tag.
you do not have the right colored name tag, you are not allowed in that space, because that is the space where people with voice and vote can be. Behind that space, at least historically, have been rows and rows of seats for Presbyterian and Synod leaders. Which means that if you want help conferring with your Presbytery leader, for instance, you go back to the curtain and you wave at them to come over, and they stand on one side of the curtain and you stand on the other side of the curtain. And then you can talk, but they are not allowed to come into your table. Even if you stand there and yell and say, I want my Presbytery leader, it won't happen. And then behind that group of people are the bleachers where folks who have observer rights get to sit. And I think there's a reason why they put Presbyterian leadership in the back. I mean, that way the commissioners don't get to see the faces that we're making.
I think, if not, I think that was just an Bob question.
Real quick, I want to echo what the first is that you do have to go back and talk to your presbyter or your corporate, steady group. Because we have information sometimes that can help you resolve conflicts that you may be thinking or feeling at that particular moment. So don't be afraid to come back to that curtain and say, because we see, well, I mean, we're sitting there observing, watching, we know about where you sit because we can kind of, yeah, up there, that's where my folks are.
We have assigned seats as well, so.
Yeah, we do, we're alphabetical. Which means, for some reason, customer this is always on the last row.
Bob.
Yeah, I'm assuming cell phones are allowed on the primary hall.
So here's the deal, this curtain idea is from an era when they wanted to prevent undue influence from outsiders to voting, right? And the idea was that you as a commissioner wouldn't be sitting there, and you could talk to another commissioner and be like, what do you think? You're trying to figure that out, you're trying to listen. And then they don't want people who are coming up and being like, Bob, you know what I think, right? Like, you know, they want, so it certainly prevents that. It does not prevent electronic communication. And honestly, one year they tried to do that, and they were like, nobody can have a cell phone. And of course, that era has passed, right? They tried to restrict, one year they tried to do Wi-Fi access, so you couldn't get on certain things. I mean, and we've given up on that. So yeah, you can text, people can text you, you can watch Twitter, and some of these things will get some play, right? When we're debating, when you all are debating environmental concerns, there'll be people who are expressing their opinions publicly about those things, and if you want, you can avail themselves. They can't push it. All right, I'll pause here. Any other questions that you might just have about the space? I just think it's really helpful for you all to walk into a room and not be like, oh my gosh, this is not at all what I expected. Yep.
Not a question, but this is a statement. I was deeply, deeply moved. I did not expect to go to a Presbyterian meeting, General Assembly meeting, and be spiritually moved. I'm getting chills, you know, just thinking about it. It is profound. Don't miss worship. It's some of the best worship you're ever going to experience in your life. You'll make relationships there that you might invite to an event. That you and your church or your presbytery or your synod are doing. But I think that's really, really, really important. We first and foremost are people of God. So take advantage of that, soak it in and, enjoy it.
Good. No, you're good. So I think next question, so next question for you all. Tell us about what it was like to be in plenary voting. What were things that helped you engage and if you wanted to speak, get done what you wanted to do? Okay.
Can I say something online?
Oh, absolutely. We've got somebody else. Rhonda, before you, we've got someone
No,
else.
that's fine.
Go ahead, Bob.
Go ahead and introduce yourself to us.
Gene Gordon, Presbytery of Carlisle. I just wanted to add that when we were speaking about contacting the Presbytery folks behind the curtain, that we must also remember that our vote is our decision. So they cannot tell us how to vote. And that is due to our own personal conscience. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, Gene, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. That's right. Yeah. Good.
I would say that it's important for you to be your best there, to take care of yourself. Even if you're an Energizer Bunny type, General Assembly can be exhausting. So when you have an opportunity, rest. Don't get so hyped up on caffeine that you can't sleep. And it's important that you be comfortable in that space, and conference centers can be very cold. So take warm clothes, take your favorite blanket if you want it. Take a sweater, take socks. You're going to be dressed for summer because it's July, but it's going to, if you have sandals on, your feet are going to be cold. So just make sure that you're prepared to take care of your own personal comfort, so that you can bring your whole being to the discernment rather than sitting there shivering.
Good, thanks, Rhonda. So here,
Okay, still works? We'll see.
Need another battery.
red light still on, yes. So this is just a little language because a couple of people have done this, and so and the only reason I would do this is because it'll matter while you were there. You all are commissioners. And actually, Gene, that goes to what you were saying. I mean, they try to be very specific about the language. You all are commissioners. I mean, you take your own vote. Your vote is between you and God. It's one thing you say is God alone is Lord of your conscience. You cannot be instructed by your presbytery, right? Your presbytery can't take a vote and say, here's where we stand. I mean, they can take a vote and say, here's where we stand on this issue, and that can certainly guide you. It does not compel you. And certainly staff members can and should not come up to you and say, by golly, you better vote this way or that way, right? That's your vote is your vote. Your commissioners. And then there are delegates. So that's a reason the language matters. So commissioners have a voice and vote at all places. There are young adult advisory delegates, which I go all the way back to when we were youth advisory delegates. I was a youth advisory delegate in 1991 in Baltimore. So which was a formative experience for me as a young adult. So those people will vote in committee and have voice in committee. They will have voice on the floor. There are also ecumenical advisory delegates. These are people who have been elected by another denomination with which we've got a relationship. They will have voice and vote in committees, and then they also have voice on the floor. And sometimes they'll speak and they'll stand up and they'll say, coming from the perspective of the Church of Scotland, here's something that I think you all might want to know about this. And those people have a little Scottish accent and really and then there are still called missionary advisory delegates, correct? Yeah, right, yeah. So there are missionary advisory delegates. These are often people who are actually employees of the Presbyterian Mission Agency. There are colleagues who are mission co-workers around the world. And for us, you have to remember how many there are. That's it. For us, sorry. 6 or 8, I mean, it's not a huge number, right? But there's
And they vote and their voters protect.
Well, so that's the next thing that I want to just describe for you all. You all will take a lot of votes. Like, as far as said, every piece of business that comes to the assembly needs to be answered in some way, right? So there's a lot of votes, and votes will go like this. Like, there'll be a lot of conversation, there'll be a call to a question, you have to vote on that. But then there will be for you, every time before you go as a commissioner, it is on plenary, an advisory vote. And so they'll walk through this process and they'll say, now we're having the advisory vote, and advisory people get ready. And then up on the big screen in front, there'll be a chart that'll come up, and it'll be, I think it's those 3 categories, and it'll say, and and there's theological student advisory delegates, there's 4 advisory delegates. And those are people who, of course, are seminary students who are there. And you'll see, you're voting on whatever you're voting on, and then it'll say, oh, look, the young adult advisory delegates, there's been 150 of them who have voted, and 20 of them were in favor, and 130 of them were opposed, right? You're like, okay. And then it'll show that chart for the theological student advisory delegates, the ecumenical advisory delegates, and the missionary advisory delegates. And then oftentimes the moderator will say, commissioners, you have been advised. And then you vote. You again are not compelled to vote like they voted, but they have given you their advice about that. And anything to add about what that was like for you all as a commissioner as you experienced that?
You'll hear oohs and ahs.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
This is more anecdotal.
Yeah.
I don't have any data behind it.
And introduce yourself, if you don't use folks.
Sure, yeah, Hunter Farrell from Pittsburgh Presbytery. I'm curious to your experience, Mary. I've had a sense, I've been to 13 assemblies as a staff person, and this will be my first assembly with a vote. But I sense that the youth advisory delegates, when they speak, people increasingly see that as this is the future of the church. There's an anticipatory, and I don't know that they look at the missionary advisory delegates or the theological, the other advisory delegates as much as the youth advisory delegates. So I've seen some power exerted. This is just my impression, and it's pretty anecdotal, but I don't know if that matches other people.
Yeah, that's great. Question here, or unless Mary, you were going to say something about that.
I was gonna say, yeah, like sometimes whenever a vote's close, if the young adult advisory delegates seem to be more heavily for or against a certain topic, it can sway it if the vote is close, because in 2016 there was a vote that was almost split 50-50. And we had to re-vote because some people's clickers didn't work. And then it was swayed, I think, forward, or it was swayed one way, and which was different from how it came out initially when all the clickers weren't going.
My question is with voting.
Oh,
I'm Jane Shockey. I am the teaching elder commissioner for Upper Ohio Valley Presbytery. And voting's been on my mind anyway, because it is an election year. How do we view this idea of, will I be throwing my vote away? Because I sometimes am not, because I know I've heard the word compel and sway. And I know that in some, but then you still vote with your conscience, and you still have, but there is that pressure sometimes of you voted with your conscience, but you threw your vote away.
You all have voted.
I'm someone who gets accused of doing that in our regular elections every year. I am comfortable with my conscience. I am swayed sometimes, and I can acknowledge that because there's something I learned that I never heard before, so I can, but that changes my conscience. But I always try to vote where God is guiding me to, and let it be. Don't care about what others think. It's what God thinks that matters.
Thank you.
Of course, and then, well, first, I'd love to have somebody who spoke in plenary walk us through just what that was like, right? Just if you did that, just, I'm not interested in what you said, but just kind of like how details, but how it happens, so they can have some sense of what it would be like for them to speak.
So to the question of throwing one's vote away, I'm going to make a comparison to national elections and what I have done to throw my vote away on a couple of occasions, and then how that's different from the way things are in General Assembly. So there was one year where I didn't, well, I was living in Alaska for one thing, which meant that the electoral college was going to go with the Republican. It didn't matter, right? I mean, it's like a 70-30 division in that state. Alaska was not a swing state. So then I was like, well, I kind of like this guy with the Constitution Party. I gotta vote for him because it didn't matter, right? What that was though, was it was a setup where there were more than two choices. That will not happen at General Assembly. In cases where there are multiple choices, more than two choices, those choices will be broken down into sets of binaries by the way that Robert's Rules works, such that at any given time, you're either voting yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, and based on the outcome of an earlier vote, it may change what you're being asked to say yes or no to next. And therefore your mind may change, you know, if you're like, I want this to happen rather than this, but then the assembly votes in such a way that says, well, now you have to choose between this and this. Right, I like A better than B or C, but they say, well, sorry, you don't get A, you have to choose between B and C. Then you have a new mind to make up, but you always will have a mind to make up. All right, to the question, are you?
Yeah, there's only two.
Oh, that's true. Do you want to speak to the moderators?
Okay, this is as an observer. Moderators stay in competition basically to the end. So if there are 4 moderators options, all 4 stay until finally someone has 50%. So you'll have repetitive votes over and over and over again until one of those individuals or 2 of those individuals, in our case, co-moderators, get elected.
Right now, you've only got a choice between 2 sets, so.
Does that cover so that we can go on to the thing about that Michael has raised about?
That's a great question.
This is about the talking.
Yeah. Talk us through talking.
So I first of all, grab your paddle. Okay, and
So where'd you go? I mean, really talk, you got it from your seat and where'd you go?
climb over a bunch of people, make sure you don't trip, because everyone brings their whole life with them. Right, so, you know, grab your paddle, make sure you don't fall, and then you stand in line. Unless you're lucky enough to be right by one of the mics, which there's just a handful, obviously, of people to do that. And this actually speaks to 2 points that have been brought up. One is, you know, how is that? And you'll see people that go sit down because what they were gonna say has been said. And I actually had to go back and grab a different paddle because some of the discussion had sort of swayed what I wanted to say, what I felt called to say.
And how long were you allowed to speak? This is a great point for us to be.
I don't even think I got to. I think it was one of those situations, if I'm remembering right, where, you know, it was pretty clear, and so then go sit down. So I got on the big screen, but just standing in line.
So, which is a great point, like there's like less between 400 and 500 people, not everybody speaks. I mean, so we don't have to, right? Lots of people go to the end and don't speak. Yeah, here, and we'll do introductions when we're.
Peggy Shannon, Washington Presbyterian. So one of the things I remember from people going up and speaking, and these are some really articulate people that were sitting around me that had a real dog in the fight, sat and wrote it out on a note card. So they knew exactly what they wanted to say when they stood up to say it. They weren't telling stories. They didn't give us any facts. They wrote it out. There's nothing wrong with that.
Can I supplement that?
Yeah, and partially because if you do speak, you're up on the big screen, And so it is a little, I mean, I'll say sometimes it's a little intimidating, like you're standing there and all of a sudden you see yourself and everybody's listening to you. And so, I mean, it's one of those things to prepare for.
Mike, were you gonna supplement that?
We have elite people that will come up and get access to their voice, and they will want to make an amendment. And it's important that that is written out as well, because as soon as you put it in, they've got to know exactly what you said, so you give it to someone who runs it up to the dais and make sure that it's covered. So you don't just say, well, I'll throw out this, they're gonna want to see the text in exact form.
Is it Peggy? Peggy raises a smart question that I want to take one step further, because I've seen it happen. Where people will write out that they see the action coming for the next day. They care about it. They want to speak to it. They write out their speech the night before on a note card. They practice it. They time it. They're ready. And then the next day, because the assembly is starting to feel stressed about the amount of business it needs to get finished, the assembly votes to cut the time allowed for speeches from 3 minutes down to 2 minutes. And suddenly that well-planned, well-crafted speech, they're panicking because it's like, how do I lose 50% of this or a third of it or whatever in order to make it fit? So if you are of that kind of mind, write your speech shorter than you might need. Because you might need to keep it within even as little as a minute, especially the later the week gets.
Oh, yep. Yeah.
Adam Dimitros, Lackawanna Presbytery. We've spoken quite a bit about the procedural aspect of it, which is in good and decent order as being Presbyterians. But one of the things that I'm always curious about is how do you maintain the spiritual life and not get wrapped up in the procedural? Because we are here to discern the will of God.
So I can think of a couple ways that I'll ask you all to answer. I think it's a great question. Forrest is going to talk a little bit about maintaining spiritual and emotional equanimity later. I mean, so we've got some depth with that. But one way we could definitely show address that is what's the spiritual life of the assembly? Like, what was worship like for you, right? Like, just and then I mean, that's not only the question you're asking, but also that question of also just how personally did you maintain your spiritual sense? I think about it sooner.
So I am not a pollywonk. Okay, I think rules sometimes get in our way. Being decent and orderly get in our way. I'm sorry. I know that's not Presbyterian. That's who God made me to be. I left General, and again, I'm getting chills thinking about it. I left General Assembly deeply moved by how strong of a presence God had in everything there. I mean, amen, for those who've been there. I mean, show of hands, who experienced that there, who's been there? I mean, this is pretty different. I don't even know these folks. You know, and we're all like, it's strong, it's profound. So be prepared to be deeply moved.
Yeah, I just want to affirm that. And beyond the worship experience itself, I think our church is best at relationship in the spaces between my idea and Mary's idea. We have to come together. We have to grow beyond ourselves. And I think a key aspect of the gospel of Jesus Christ is it frees Hunter Farrell to get beyond Hunter Farrell. It's not all about me. And the great heresy of our time and our culture, I believe, is that we think it's all about us. It's all about me. And generally, it's just, oh my gosh, look at this. And so if we can zoom up, there is a randomness that at first an individualist like myself finds insulting. The moderator, you'll hear the moderator say, we haven't heard from microphone 7 in a while. And you've been waiting you know, at microphone 3 for 20 minutes to get your little note card read, so the people back home can say, oh, look, he brought in that really important point. And it's not at all about that. It's the Spirit of God moving among us. And it's not gonna come to microphone 3, darn it. They won't get to hear my pearl of wisdom. But the Spirit is directing it because Mary has a word to say. And that needs to be heard by the assembly. And I just stand back, I'm getting chills.
Yeah.
It happens, and you say, praise me. It just happened. So we can zoom up, the drone needs to come up about 1,000 more feet to see what's going on in the assembly between people.
If we could get our congregations, and our presbyteries and our synods to operate the way General Assembly operates. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, we've devoted a half an hour to, I mean, what I've heard here is sort of how does the assembly itself foster spiritual renewal in the moment, right? We're gonna spend a half hour this afternoon talking about how do you individually in your own space vis-a-vis the General Assembly, both during and after, make sure that your soul stays intact. That's gonna be a key conversation. I have one thing that I want to be sure happens before noon, but I am not in a rush, so.
Pat Schaefer, Washington Presbytery. This all sounds wonderful, but I know in our presbyteries and in our congregations that there are contentious issues. And the stories that I've heard from previous General Assemblies, there were issues of contention. And I would like to hear from you all, if you were at any of those General Assemblies, and how did that affect your spirit, and also the feeling of General Assembly?
And if I could add on to that, because this is segues into, I think, an important conversation for us too, which is you will go back, you are commissioners to a General Assembly from your presbytery. You'll go back and you'll stand on the floor of your presbytery and someone will, if you don't say, and here's what the assembly did about this, someone's gonna raise their hand and be like, oh, right? So there's that. Yep.
So I was at the 2018 one last, and it wasn't in a plenary session, but back then, when they were still meeting in person for the whole thing, they also had a room set up with like more convention, like tables and stuff. And it was when, well, it was before what we had going on in Israel and Palestine now, but there was still heated debate, and there was an Israel table and there was a Palestine table. They do not get along, all right? We know that now, pretty clear. There was actually a physical fight that happened and occurred in that room that had to be split up. So, and then it was also the one where we had demonstrations that were done where people were laying around and we had to figure out a way to walk around them as a demonstration. So these things do happen. But I think what his point is, the other stuff that happens is more God's greatness over, takes all of that negative stuff that we tend to do as when we're being our human self and not our spiritual self.
One of the things is also our attitude of coming back and sharing from a wider perspective. Unfortunately, in our presbytery, we've had delegates who have come back and vomited it on us because they did not get their particular thing done. And then that's unfortunate, but that does happen. But I think everybody up here who's been to General Assembly, we all kind of went, oh wow, this is incredible. This person got up at the right moment and said the right thing at the right time, in the right space, and it changed. And that's what I think we who have actually been present on General Assembly floor and watched all of that happen can testify to. It's just when we do hear reports on presbytery, it's sometimes very, very negative because their particular item lost and they were going to guarantee that they got that passed. Because the church has to think like they think.
We're going to be on. And just for Kenny, just trying to, I really appreciate this question. You know, we're talking a lot about information, being prepared. Pray for the General Assembly. Pray for yourselves. Pray for the other commissioners. Pray for the person who's going to moderate your committee. Pray for the person who's people are going to be elected moderators and co-moderators. I mean, right that.
Pray for the other side.
Pray for the people who are going to disagree with you about a particular issue. Yeah. Yes. Go ahead, Katie. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Yates Brungraber from Carlisle Presbytery. The illustration I would bring forward is from the Pittsburgh General Assembly. Hard to believe that might have been about 12 years ago now. And the conversation of the committee regarded LGBTQ. And what I remember is the respect and the prayerfulness that the moderators held in that space. It was a highly emotional conversation. There were at least 20 people on the committee at the table in the front of the room, and I would propose there may have been 200 people in the room wanting to speak to this. And the moderators would offer one microphone and set the tone. We will listen, and those who speak will speak to the moderator. We will not talk to one another. And there was more than, I'm going to say there may have been 2 or 3 times that I witnessed just in one committee session where the moderators stopped and lit a candle and asked for prayer for all parties, because it was so close to the heart, to the core, to the identity of so many. And I came away as an observer from that experience, and I have shared that with many people who will never go to General Assembly, but to assure them that the desire to follow God's will, the willingness to put aside our own preferences and goals and objectives, that we can be both humble and proud of our denomination in these times.
Thank you, Katie. Dave, I saw you. Thanks, Michael.
David Busey, Donegal Presbytery. It's my joy to be the voting delegate to General Assembly for the first time. I've been an observer 5 times. My wife Jane and I have gone with lots of them. We're GA groupies. And what my self-appointed task was for the other 5 back before COVID times was to sit quietly, not express my opinions, which I had plenty, in the committee dealing with Middle East affairs, Palestine, Israel, and such. And just all the time that that committee was meeting, to just be praying for what was going on in that committee. And you can ask your friends back home, not only to tell them, have them tell you what their thoughts are on certain issues, but then when they send you off to the General Assembly to keep you solidly in their prayers.
I think we're getting close to lunchtime, and so maybe just wrap up, the other things that, if you've got other things that you feel like it would be good for us to hear about General Assembly, plenary being in plenary, and then Forrest, your final thing, so. Yeah.
This relates to what I think you were saying, Dave. I have seen things go to General Assembly and then come back to the presbyteries for ratification, I think it's called. And they've lost momentum and went in other ways within presbyteries. And that's really a shame. And not just because I felt one way or the other about the issue, but I think it's because some of that spirit from the General Assembly didn't get translated down to the presbytery. And I pray and pray a lot.
Any other 2 cents? Okay. Michael, are you familiar with Jody Craiglow's 50-cent paradigm for participation?
No, not.
So this is not mine. I'm gonna go back to proceduralism for a minute, partly because that's my mother tongue. With plenary, the original wisdom that I was taught was if you speak twice, you'll be considered wise. And if you speak 4 times, you'll be considered an idiot. And since then, I've learned that it's not quite that simple. And a peer in the circles, she doesn't really have any kind of titles for me to give you, but basically she's somebody who lives and breathes Presbyterian life, came up with a 50-cent rule, which is you go into the plenary with 50 cents. And if you speak, you give up a quarter. But if you make a motion that helps the assembly move itself along, you get back a dime. And if you make a motion that closes debate when you see everybody around you going, how much longer is this going to be, right? And if you say, I move that we call the question, right, you get back a nickel. Because you become known as a person who's helping the plenary move forward, rather than becoming known as a person who just wants to talk and keep the presbytery going, or keep the meeting going longer and longer and longer. And so you actually can earn back the right to speak a 3rd time on an issue that matters to you, if you demonstrate that your participation is for the good of the whole body. So I found it a really helpful one and wanted to throw it out there. Are we?
I think like we got 5 minutes until lunch, so I think it's a good time to be done and say grace and strategy and walk with it.
Okay. So you need my, Doug, you have talked less up here than many people, especially than me. Will you pray for lunch?
Thank you, Lord, for this time together to learn, to share, to look at how we work best as your people are trying to struggle to improve the way that we witness our mission in this world. Be with us now as we take a minute to relax, to share. Bless this food to our use and us to continue in your service. Rest our Lord. When are we coming back?
It's like one live people. Is it an hour?
Starting at 1.
1 o'clock?
Yep. And food is being served right here.
So there's silverware and small plates on your tables. There are large plates and salad back there. It looks like, and so you all, you get supper or get lunch, take a walk. You know, we're back together, start to get one. Okay. So first, let's just, I mean, it's post lunch. We had turkey and pork and mashed potatoes and gravy, and it felt like it was at my Thanksgiving table. So let's do it. Stand up if you're able. Stand up. You know, we'll just do a little stretch here, right? It's good. Yeah. There you go. Little. If you want to, that's fine. But little shoulder thing. There you go. So yeah, fine. Just a little movement. Hey, Mike, can we do a picture? Can we do a group picture? We'll do it right now. So we're gonna do a group picture. So that's right. That's right. We go 1, 2, 3. All right, now everybody's gonna wave at me. 1, 2, 3. Excellent.
There may be photos already on Facebook, just so you know. You've been warned.
So we have, it's one of, we really are, you know, our goal is to get you out of here, get all of us out of here in time, and we can get home before dark, right? We want this, we also want this to be really good for you all. Just a reminder, we are doing an evaluation and we're really serious about that. Like, as we said, this is Sparks and I's first time doing this, and so we want to make it better. You can, so I saw some people doing it even in real time, you know, we really will take that seriously if you've got suggestions for us. We're gonna do a little bit, about 30 minutes now, just on kind of like, hey, how do we all come out of this with as people who are, God, thank you that I went through this, and I'm a better person. I've got to swear myself I'm a better person for it. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about at the assembly, and then Forrest is just gonna talk a little bit about after the assembly, and then actually we're gonna ask you in your table groups just to have a conversation among your table groups, and just and there you may draw on other experiences. So you may have been to other conferences where you're like, oh, you know what? Here's some ways that you just really thrived in an environment that could be an intense environment. I want to say just a few, you know, just a few kind of almost like random thoughts, but just thoughts from me. Let's think first about your 3 or 4 days of committee work. Right, so the way your committee is going to work is it's going to have an advanced meeting sometime this month, probably get to know you type stuff. You'll have met people, and then there might even be a second time they try to get committees together. But your committee is going to do the bulk of its work 3 or 4 days at the end of June. Here's some thoughts from me about that. All right, find a place to do it. Like, find a place to do it that is not where you're gonna get interrupted all the time. I mean, right, this is a significant enough thing. You're gonna spend hours on a computer looking at a Zoom screen. And so if it were me, I'd find a place that has some light. Like, I'd find a place that has, and it doesn't have, you know, either parents or kids or grandkids that are running through all the time, because I think you're gonna wanna be able to attend to it. I would think ahead about water and snacks, you know, just right, yeah.
This comes from the fact that a colleague of hers did Credo the same time that I did. I went up to Erie and he went down to Pittsburgh. What we didn't know. I wonder if you could almost like swap churches with someone, go to someone else's church.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you're away from.
Yeah, there's a strategy for that, right? Like, and that's right. And that's like, where you're part of a Presbyterian, there are other places that aren't that far away from you that would be reasonable to ask them to do something hosting wise, right? To say, hey, can I have a room and some Wi-Fi? So I think that's a great strategy. Some of you have Presbyterian offices, maybe that's a place that you can go. I have seen people do something analogous to this, where they kind of got together so that you're not completely isolated. And so maybe you have maybe go to maybe a couple of you get together in a church, and then you go into your own little rooms to do your committee meetings, but then when you're on break, you can talk to one another, right? I mean, just if that would help you be less isolated, there's strategies for that.
I already know someone who's on my committee.
There you go.
Right, I think we gotta hang.
Right, yeah, I just, let's be, and I would say if you're planning on doing that, work with your committee leadership to make sure that I don't know how voting's gonna go. You don't wanna both be on the same screen, and then they're like, okay, and all of a sudden you're like, we got one vote, you know, just like you gotta work that stuff out, right? So be aware of that kind of stuff, yeah. I know a number of people who have deliberately asked people to be prayed for them while this is going on. I would commend that to you all. Presumably, if we're in this room, we're part of a congregation, right? I mean, there are people who haven't pledged their lives to you, right? But we've pledged some level of support to one another. So to stand up in a congregation and say, hey, here's what's going on, I would appreciate your prayers about these specific things. And you have a presbytery staff, and they will want to be supporting you, and whatever could help you, let them know about that. So there's some thought to me about Zoom time, and we've all done enough. Well, I don't know. I've done it. Like, Zoom fatigue is real. Your eyes will get tired, right? Just like plan all that kind of stuff. It does help if you're on a Zoom for a lot of hours to look up from the Zoom, to get out from this distance, up, right, the eyes focus on different distance. All that stuff helps. It helps to stand up and move around. I have a standing desk. I mean, you might want to you can afford a whole new desk for the state, go for a new desk, or I'm all for that. But there are ways to, there are things we can build, right, that you could do that for just a day and be like, well, you know, I don't try to stand so I can walk around with it. There's ways, think about your physical health while you're getting ready to be on Zoom for a lot of times. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would say, and think about your eating health, right? I mean, that's, you know, I mean, Forrest, you mentioned this, like, I mean, this is just, you know, don't drink so much coffee that you crash, right? Just think, and again, like, our goal here is that you're thinking ahead, right? That you're preparing, that you're planning to the extent that is most helpful for you. I don't know what people's personal spiritual lives is. This is a season in life to commit yourself to be praying, to enter into disciplines that help you be attentive to God's work in your life and through you. So people have practices of daily prayer and reading scripture on a daily basis as they get ready for these types of things and in life in general. And I commend that. I'm part of another pastor in my presbytery that I get together with on an almost weekly basis and pray with. I mean, you could ask somebody to say, hey, could you get together with me the morning of these committee meetings and pray for me? I mean, like, there are ways to attend to God's presence in our midst. And as a number of us have really helpfully, I think, noted, this in a lot of this is a very human experience. Like, you will make a lot of decisions, right? You'll press yes or you'll press no, and a lot of times you'll make amendments, you'll hear things, you'll be present. Our goal in the midst of this is to know the mind of Christ. That's our collective goal. And you are entering into that space and invited into that space where, as sometimes it's not about us, it's about God's will for our future and our participation. So you're going to be on Zoom. Then you are going to, I suppose, get in a car unless you live close enough to walk, and you're going to go to an airport. Unless you're driving to Salt Lake City, and then you'll just drive for a long time, and you're going to get in a plane and you're going to fly to Salt Lake City. So plan to fly, right? Just, I mean, think about what it takes for you to navigate those spaces and be ready for that and do that well. And I mean, really be helpful. Make sure you've got. Is your driver's license expired? Do you have a passport? Right, you gotta get on a plane. And if you do not want to arrive at the Pittsburgh airport and the TSA person says, sorry, are you ready to know these, right? So we would like you all to get there. And then we will be in Salt Lake City. And as I think we've kind of intimated about this. Of course, we don't know how this will go, because we've never done it this way before. In previous assemblies, the first day of plenary, everybody's happy. Like, they're like, oh, this is fun, and we're listening to one another, and we're working together well. And maybe there's something controversial that happens. And then about the second day, people start to look at the docket, where the monitor will be like, by the way, we're a little behind. And the anxiety level goes up a little bit. And then what will happen is there will be some major piece of business that they allotted an hour for, and it takes 3.5 hours. Right? It's not like it just explodes the schedule. And then they will say, hey, we're gonna stay a little late tonight. And then you'll stay late. And then they'll do the next day, and then you'll be a little farther behind schedule. And those of us who have been around have seen General Assembly go to 11, 12, 1. In Pittsburgh, we ended it because they told us the buses were gonna stop running, like, you know. In Detroit, they told us all, you're gonna walk back to the hotel, because we were all in one hotel. I mean, it's like, so that is to say, be prepared physically. This can be an intense and tiring physical experience. So it is a good time to have been well rested and to have drunk a lot of water, to be eating healthy. So, and while you were there, your who was it that said, Mary, did you say there was stuff from the Presbyterian, right? Yeah. So it's quite possible your Presbyterian staff will provide you with all manner of snacks. The Donegal Presbyterian staff finds out what snacks the people want beforehand. And then there are times when the ropes are down, like that curtain, which for worship, we all get to come up and sit with you. And I'll just tell you, the dog country people, we bring snacks along and we leave them on the table for the. And you know, then you can share them with other people. So I think you want to be prepared for that. Attitude matters. Going in with a good attitude, being interested in the people around you, asking them how they're doing, caring about them, I mean, all that's gonna be a part of being part of the assembly. And then, on the last day, there will be a vote to adjourn. Some of you will have left before it because of whenever your plane leaves. And you get on a plane and you'll come home. And now Horace is going to tell you what to do then.
Go to bed.
Yes. First, go to bed and get some rest. Don't schedule, if you're a pastor, I would not preach on that Sunday immediately following. If there's some way that you can arrange for that to happen otherwise. It may be that a vacation is a great thing to have happen immediately afterwards, if the purpose of the vacation is to go to some mountain cabin and not do anything except read romance novels or whatever your thing is.
Permission to recycle the sermon?
Yes. Who's stopping it? But what I want to focus on, yeah, so first thing is rest, kind of get your balance back because you will have spent yourself down. It's almost impossible that won't happen. But what I want to think about then is sort of a longer arc that may, depending on the speed of your presbytery, go from July as late as possibly next February or so, when by the time things have really wrapped up, because the presbytery will have voted on proposals to changing the book of order by that. And so I think what I want to do really is give you 5 words that aren't all in the same mental space, but at least there are some places where you can kind of drive your pegs into the rock wall face, sort of. Disappointment, interpretation, sanctification, providence, and community. And to some degree, what I'm talking about here maybe follows a bit of a chronological sequence, at least for me, I know it did. So disappointment begins, I found it helpful to recognize out of my experiences with General Assembly that everybody goes home from General Assembly disappointed about something. It's just a question of what they're disappointed about, right? And I might think that you're dead wrong for being disappointed about what you're disappointed about. And you think I'm dead wrong about being disappointed about what I'm disappointed about. But the thing we can agree on was the General Assembly was disappointed. And then the task becomes, do I let that disappointment be the thing upon which I fix my mind? Because it's a natural human response to take the negative and dwell on it, right? And then it becomes a challenge to say, I am not going to dwell on this, right? Philippians 4, right? Whatever is true, whatever is holy, whatever is just, et cetera, think on these things. I am convinced that Paul he was writing to a church, right? He was writing to a church that was in conflict. He was not saying, think about a whole bunch of sort of heavenly ideals, the holy, the just, right? He was not going all Plato on his listeners. He was thinking about, you know, that lady in the third pew behind you who right? Whatever is holy about her, think about that as often as you have to. because she's gonna continue to annoy you. So every single chance you get, think about what is holy about her. And I think that applies for the General Assembly as well, that is in those moments when the temptation turns to me to just think, this thing has not just gone off the rails. This is on the rails and it's heading straight to hell. That's the moment when it's like, okay, what about that experience that I have is holy, is just, is true, is righteous? Because it's there. It's just that human nature doesn't necessarily move first in the direction of looking for it. So that then moves toward what I mean by interpretation, which is what meaning do I make out of this event that occurred? And that then sets you up for responding to folks back home who weren't there themselves, who didn't get it directly, but who have heard a whole lot of stuff going on through the Presbyverse, right? The chatter online, the New York Times came up with a headline they knew would sell more papers, all of that kind of stuff. Because the goal of those kind of things is to generate conversation. It's not to reveal truth. And you have a unique space in that conversation to say the part that's left out in the pursuit of a wider understanding of what happened in the room where you were and they weren't. That then becomes a difficult thing, right? Because you take on the role of mediator almost. And that then is unto your own sanctification. Because having to be between the space of what is true and right and holy, and you're doing your own work because you're born within yourself on that, and the space of people who are angry, right? We move into that space in between, where I would say it's starting to embody a little bit of what it means to be the Christ life there, in between the anger of the world and the attempt of the church to be different than the world, even when it's consistently missing the mark. So then, disappointment, interpretation, sanctification, and ultimately for me, it becomes a matter of trust in God's providence. Again, there are things that I have seen the assembly do over the years that I'm delighted with. There are things that I've seen over the years the assembly has done that I just think, who are you? And then I think to myself, I genuinely believe that God will work through the assembly whenever possible, and God will work in spite of the assembly whenever necessary. But the fact of the matter is that God will work, and as long as I get to be a part of God choosing the Presbyterian Church USA, that God ain't done with that yet, right? Great. And when the day comes that God is done with the PCUSA, God is not done with the church, because the church will live on, right? The church is the fullness of the one who fills all in all, says Ephesians. And if that means that it's no longer the PCUSA, that's still God. What I don't want to do is tell you, you have to think like I do, but I do want to offer you some ways in which I have worked that out through my own theology for my own, both peace of mind and my salvation. And then the last thing is find your peeps, right? Community back home, the ones who know you, the ones who've been with you along this road, and tap into them, especially when it's moments of, I can't sort this one out by myself. Let's go ahead and go with Michael's prompt now. And move it in the direction of how have you in the past, in spaces that you've been, sort of where the only thing that's good about the situation you're in is that you believe that God is ultimately working it out for your salvation. Because as far as you can tell here, nobody around you is interested in your salvation. How in church life, in General Assembly life specifically, perhaps have you found yourself thinking, this is what it means for it to be about my life with the people of God and my life with God? And how do you sort of project forward and think these are some of the strategies that I'm going to use when I'm there and after I'm there, so that I can keep my soul on straight, not my head on straight. I could keep my soul lined up the way that it's meant to be, even in the middle of some moments that are going to be a lot of pressure.
Of course.
Do we have a hand?
Make big microphone. Go ahead, Rhonda.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I would add to, just from a practical perspective, add to what Forrest said. Your presbytery is going to ask you to give a report whenever the next presbytery meeting is. So jot yourself some notes before you forget, and don't just talk about the results of the votes, but your overall impressions and some of those things that Forrest was just talking about, what was important to you. And because people who are sitting there, you want to encourage them to be commissioners at the next General Assembly. You don't want them to say, oh, I don't want to do that. So, you know, think about the good things that everybody's been talking about here, and include that in your report. And then also think about applying to serve on a synod or a national committee. If this really gets you all jazzed up about the connectionalness of our denomination, you can keep going. You can be a commissioner to the synod or to a General Assembly committee. And so just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you. Yeah, that'll be an important role, as the presbytery back home will ask to hear from you. And how you think about what you're interpreting to them becomes really important. Are we ready to turn toward each other and have a conversation that goes, let's say 10 minutes? How, in your own experience, have you taken hard situations and made them into moments, opportunities for sanctification? And how do you imagine, as you go into General Assembly, both during the time there and during the time afterwards, how do you imagine both looking for the true, just, good, holy kind of stuff that is there, and also shoring yourself up for the sake of keeping your soul on straight?
Or in my words, what advice would you give one another?
I can always use more words. Okay. Let me regather you all. Thank you for your good conversations around the table, of which I am confident, even though I eavesdrop. So we are on the home stretch here. We are aiming for this round to take an hour or less. I've counted up the items though, and there are 18 little points that Michael and I are going to make. It's an 18-point sermon. So if we keep each of the points to 3 minutes or less, we'll be out of here in an hour. So that's. That's right. Okay. So you have it on the board, you have it on your sheets. And it does go, no, it's on, I think it's on the back of your sheets. Anyway, it's there in the agenda. What I want to do before we get into the particular items is lay out some principles for you to consider. And this, full disclosure, I come by this opinion by way of having served on the advisory committee on the Constitution. So there are a couple of things that whenever an item comes before the assembly, there are 3 things that you can do to just make a member of the ACC angry. Okay, and those are these 3 things. One is to lean on what was intended by the action item, rather than what the language of the action item specifies that the outcome will be, okay? Once it passes General Assembly, the world doesn't care what the motion was meant to do. The world cares what the language causes it to do. And so you want to listen to those kind of things with an ear to that. What is the actual outcome going to be? The next thing is beware of populating lists within the Book of Order that add further things onto a list that's already there. Because at some point it may be, and it kind of depends on the way that the words are written, that a list can become an exclusive group of items. In other words, the only things we will consider are those that are on the list, as opposed to being a including but not limited to kind of list. And so whenever actually language can be specified generally, that says, you know, this sort of stuff matters, and we're not going to give you a lot of examples, this sort of stuff matters, done, right? Then what that means is that everything's included. So be cautious about lists. And then finally, and this is probably the biggest one that ACC folks get grumpy about, the Book of Order is meant to be a constitutional document. Think how often the Constitution of the United States is amended. Think how often the Book of Order is amended. A little different. The problem comes when people start thinking of the Book of Order as a manual of administrative operations for the country. And that then is where lots of operational language finds its way in, because a given presbytery thinks that this is the way that things ought to be managed. Hear that word, right? As opposed to these are the principles for governance of the church. The more that it remains constitutional, the more the operational management of the church can be kept in the place where it's meant to be, which is at a session, at a presbytery, whatever level is where it's contextually most appropriate. So those kind of things, you know, as a former member of the ACC, that's going to be my axe to grind, and I'd love for you all to carry those axes into the plenary hall with you. And that's all I'm going to say about that. To quote somebody else named.
So the next thing that Forrest and I want to do is just lift up for you some of the overtures that are coming to the General Assembly. And we recognize that it is a risk for us to lift up some and say, here's some important things coming, because you may get into your committee and be like, why didn't they mention that? You know, so that's just, but we're not going to march through everything. What we did was we actually contacted the executive presbyters and city clerks of the Synod, and we said, hey, what do you all think would be good for us collectively? So this is not just the Michael and Forrest list. We tried to involve some of your colleagues and our colleagues, say what are good things for us to think about. We also did not, and the first one is an illustration of this, not all of these do we think, although some of them are like really controversial. So this is not the list of a super controversial thing. Some of them are, but this first one is an example of something else, which is there are a number of things that are going to come before the General Assembly that are really, really important. And they may not be all that controversial, but we would want you all to be aware that you are acting on these things. So the first one I want you to be aware of, is CF01. And the CF stands for a committee. Anybody know what committee that is? Christian Formation. Anybody here on the Christian Formation Committee? We got somebody here on the Christian Formation. So you'll be dealing with this. This is an overture from the Riverside Presbytery asking for educational resources for congregational use to meet the needs of the small church. So here's part of what I want to use this as an illustration of something that Forrest just mentioned to you. That's the title. The actual overture does not mention the word small church. If this overture passes, it will not compel the Presbyterian Publishing Corporation to do something for small churches, because it's not written that way. And I'm not criticizing Riverside Presbytery. I'm not saying the PPC doesn't care about small churches, right? I'm just making the point for all of us that the language that gets passed is the language that matters. The rationale doesn't matter, the title doesn't matter, right? What gets passed will matter. So that will be something for you all to think about. We also wanted to lift this up for you to make you all aware that the matter of the increasing number of smaller congregations in our denomination is before the presbytery, and I see you all nodding, and I think for Forrest and me and your presbytery leaders, it matters, like, for us to address those things. There you go, I think that's good about it.
DOE03, domestic, what's that called again? Domestic engagement, that's right.
I heard of that, I heard of that, I'm not sure I know what the other was.
Department of Energy. Okay, title can be really lively if people don't read past the title, right? Children and gun violence, well, that's interesting. You're gonna have people who have an opinion coming in. So this is a case of, again, read, if you care to engage in a matter, read what it's actually asking for. What's interesting here to me is that there is a summons to congregations in the Presbyterian Church to take some specific action around children as part of the movement to prevent gun violence. Stop, right? And then it says, here are some suggestions. Really important to understand that suggestions are suggestions. It is not calling upon every congregation in the PCUSA to do the following 6 things. That's a key distinction, and that's a place where sort of intent and outcome, again, or sort of what a person hopes might come of it versus what is meant to come of it versus what will come of it, all are key different things. The other thing then is to ask the Office of Public Witness to make some statements. Office of Public Witness often makes statements. You can decide whether those change anything or not in the world in which we live. Okay.
Yeah. So these 3, the gun violence, the fossil fuels, and then Israel and Palestine, Middle East issues, are issues that General Assembly has dealt with repeatedly over the years. So I think just for you all to know, as you arrive, there will be people who bring history and will know it, and you can go back and look too to know what's happened. There's an overture coming to the Environmental Committee about fossil fuels, and it would do a number of things. I'll just read 2 of them to you. Well, one of them maybe. Declare that all publicly traded companies whose primary source of income is derived from the exploration, development, and production of fossil fuels are to be placed on the General Assembly's list of prohibited securities. So this is an overture that would not only make pronouncements about what we think, but also the direct actions. Because you'll hear this, if it comes before the General Assembly, the General Assembly can tell the Presbyterian Foundation how to invest the investments of the PCUSA, right? I mean, it's like any of us deciding, you know what, I don't want to own that stock anymore, right? You can collectively do that, and the foundation will do that. The General Assembly cannot order the Board of Pensions to invest in a particular way, because the Board of Pensions has a fiduciary responsibility towards the retirement of the people for whom they hold the funds, right? That's their responsibility. What the General Assembly can and has done in the past is make basically what are suggestions to the Board of Pensions, which the Board of Pensions has uniformly said we will abide by those things to the best that we can. And sometimes what that means is they step themselves out of a particular stock over a series of years because of what their investment strategy is. But it's probably good for you all to know a couple of things about this. It's coming. It will have to do with both the public pronouncements, but also some practices. And there's various ways that works out in the practicality of how we live together as a denomination.
International 02 and 04 have to do with relations between Israel and Palestine. Interestingly enough, 04 came about a couple of years ago. It is not a response to what happened since October 7th of last year. 02 is more recent and does have to do with what happened since October 7th. anytime Israel and Palestine come up in General Assembly, you will have deeply invested competing interests from both commissioners and from folks who are advocates speaking on behalf of one side or the other. On the one side are folks who are very committed to economic and social justice for the Palestinians, read through the lens of what is going on economically and socially there. On the other side are folks who are very committed to interfaith relationships with Jewish folks, and that becomes complicated. We had a moment in 2018 where an apparently bland statement on the part of the General Assembly, recognizing and speaking in favor of solidarity with Palestinians, was experienced as basically a brush off of Jewish folks, not just in Israel, but back in the United States. And we had former moderators of the General Assembly walking out of the convention hall going, well, there goes 20 years of interfaith relationships down the tubes. I am not telling you that you should not vote a certain way, but what I'm telling you is that this one is fraught, and it will, at least in my lifetime, not ever not be. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to do one more thing with this one because the language is really interesting. O2, the one that's called utilize the gospel of love as a guiding principle in the Presbyterian Church's advocacy and humanitarian efforts. Listen for the language here and for the case of what does this actually mean? The Presbytery of Yukon overtures the 226th General Assembly to utilize the gospel of love as a guiding principle in its advocacy and humanitarian efforts, particularly in addressing the conflict between Israel and Hamas with the aim to foster peace, reconciliation, and justice in the region. The Presbyterian Church USA should apply the gospel of love to its approach in dealing with the conflict by implementing a threefold solution. The question I would put to the assembly is, what do they mean by it? The General Assembly is supposed to do something vis-a-vis the gospel of love with regard to humanitarian efforts. The General Assembly doesn't have humanitarian efforts. The agencies of the PCUSA have humanitarian efforts. Who is the PCUSA that should apply the gospel of love? If you're in this committee, I would say work toward an amendment that specifies where and how it's going to happen so that something actually happens, unless you don't want anything to happen.
You all are going to deal with some weighty and very substantive political and social issues on behalf of our denomination, and thank you for doing that. You'll also deal with things that have to do with the life of our denomination, and that's what the next three overtures that are grouped together in the ordination committee have to do with shared ministry. And there's a group of three of these, 01, 02, and 03. And what they do collectively is put into the book of order a recognition that an increasing number of pastors are serving more than one congregation. Right now, it just says congregation. And so this puts things like bracket after congregation X, so it says congregations, or puts the language like into it. The terms of call shall always meet or exceed the required minimum of the Presbyterian effect when the call is made. That's in there, and here would be the new language. Or in the case of shared ministry, the aggregate of multiple terms of call. In other words, it's kind of codifying into the book order. We're not. I have no idea if this will be controversial, not controversial. If you've used terms like yoke ministry, I mean that can be a term people have used but they don't use. But this is a collective recognition or seeking to recognize that in various ways we've got more and more people who are serving smaller and smaller congregations.
Ordination 06. Some of you may remember from 14 months ago, there was an ord exam that some of the seniors had to deal with that was in their language triggering. that has led to an overture here suggesting that it's time to take a look at the way that the preparation for ministry process works more broadly. And so when I say committee to review CPM process, that's not actually the language of the overture. I'm just using that as shorthand. It's really to look at the entire process from the moment that a church identifies a person as this person has potential to be a teaching elder to the moment when that person actually becomes a teaching elder. What does that path look like? And the presbytery that brought this is suggesting what we need to do is create a special committee to step away and really look at it in its fine points all the way through, not just at the point of board exams, and say, is this the right path for entrance into ordained minister of word sacrament service in the church going forward, and bring a recommendation back to the next General Assembly. I don't know what I think about whether the ordination process ought to be looked at, but I love that they're setting up a committee rather than trying to solve this problem among 700 people all at once.
Horace, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
On this, on PC Biz, does it show financial implications? I'm assuming it's setting up a committee and meetings and.
That's great, and I'll go ahead and answer that question. So we're gonna say that a little bit later, which is a great question, Hunter. It does not yet, and it will not until the committee itself considers it and would decide what they're going to do, because there are different financial implications depending on what the committee decides. How many times a committee, what the General Assembly committee decides, because it has to do with how many times that committee would meet, what the arc of its work is and what they're doing. So there's not yet. And just since Hunter asked about financial implications, there are some things that the assembly does that don't have any financial implications for the nomination. So if you all send out a proposed amendment to the book of order, there's no financial implications to that. If you all vote to set up a committee, there are financial implications to that. And if you instruct, at one time, the assembly decided that it was going to instruct the Presbyterian Mission Agency to enter into doing more translation, right? So they said, hey, we want everything translated. Big financial implications if you say to people, now you got to translate everything. And in the past, those financial implications have been expressed in one of two ways. If the business was considered to be a part of the office of the General Assembly, which often committee support would be, it was expressed as an increase in terms of per capita. So the office of the General Assembly would come in and they would say, hey, we've worked on our budget for the next 2 years. We think this will be per capita. And then if a committee brought forth something like this, they would come before the Presbytery or the General Assembly and they would say, if you pass this, you're adding 10 cents to per capita. Like, know that, like, just, so that would be one way. And the other is to the Presbyterian Mission Agency budget. So the translation one, then they came and they said, hey, this adds, I think it was like $200,000. I mean, it added, like, it was like, hey, this adds significant money to the Presbyterian Mission Agency budget. Now, here's the complication this year. The Unification Commission has instructed Office of General Assembly and the Presbyterian Mission Agency to prepare a combined budget starting for the future. And I just personally do not know what that means for the financial implications. In other words, if they're just going to come up and they're going to say, hey, this adds $40,000, it's going to have to be funded somewhere, or if they'll continue to talk about an increase in per capita. We haven't been apprised of that yet. But we have seen an assembly that formed 16 committees. I'm serving on the second version of one of those. And so the assembly cheerfully went on going, oh, that's 10 cents. Oh, that's 20 cents. And then they got to the end and they were like, oh, we just added $1.50 to per capita. And it was a huge percentage of per capita, right? So it's good for, in my opinion, it's good for you all as commissioners to be tracking that. Because again, at the beginning, everyone's cheerful, like, oh, let's do that. Oh, that'll be fine. And then you get to the end and someone stands up and says, let's do this. And all of a sudden people go, hey, wait, doesn't that cost money? And it doesn't. There are things that do. So there's that little funding speech. as many of us would be aware, over the course of the last 30 to 40 years, our denomination, our General Assembly has dealt with matters of human sexuality, ordination, and marriage over the arc of it. It's been quiet for a little while in that particular thing. There is an overture coming that asks the General Assembly to recommend to the presbyteries to change the Book of Order in 2 ways. And I think you all be aware of this. You all can't change the Book of Order. You can recommend to presbyteries that the Book of Orders get changed, and then it goes back out to presbyteries, and more than half of presbyteries would need to vote in favor of something for it to, in the end, become a change. So you all would recommend changes, but you don't make changes to the Book of Order. This particular overture adds in F10403, which includes in it a list of categories that we do not discriminate against. Like, I would say that it would add gender, these words, gender identity and sexual orientation. So it adds those two, I mean, there's 4 words, right, but two phrases to it. And then it would add to G20104B, which is the responsibilities for ordination, that the examination for ordination shall include but not be limited to, and there's a list, and they would add this phrase, and the principles of participation, representation, and non-discrimination found in F10304, which would include possibly those 2 words. There's probably, you could probably already go online and find some conversation around this. There is, in my opinion, a substantive question about whether passing this would cause people who could not affirm same-sex marriage, or who would not vote in favor of ordaining or installing someone in a same-sex relationship, whether they could continue to serve in our denomination. Right, so it's kind of, it's a down date of that, possibly. And again, people have different opinions about that, so I won't be too crisp about that either. So, but that would be certainly before that committee, and in some way, shape, or form before the assembly.
Renunciation of jurisdiction warrants a little bit of background for those of you who might not deal with that every day. The most severe disciplinary action that an entity of the Presbyterian Church USA can take is to say, you are no longer a member. So at a session level, telling a member of the congregation, you are no longer a member of the congregation, is as bad as it gets. For a presbytery telling a pastor, you are no longer a pastor in the PCUSA, is as bad as it gets. Renunciation of jurisdiction makes the disciplinary process complicated, because it is the moment at which, in the middle, say, of a trial, for disciplinary reasons, the person who's been accused says, I'm not a member of you all anymore, you can't do anything to me, and walks away. And that is as bad as it gets. And then the question is, how does the one against whom that accused have the one who's been offended, what is their recourse for any kind of sense of resolution? And repeatedly then, over the years, and this has been going on as long as I have been attending General Assemblies, there have been attempts to insert language that in one way or another keep the disciplinary process going, even though the person accused has walked away from it, to determine whether that person is in fact guilty or not guilty of what they've been accused of, not for their own sake, but for the resolution of the one offended against. And consistently, the denomination's response has been, what you're asking us to do is like when the Catholic Church dug up the corpse of the Pope in order to set him on trial back in 1200, whatever it was, so they could find him guilty and then stick him back in the ground. And that response for the folks who have had certain experiences that have then led to other folks being disciplined, that response has never been adequate for the township. So there is another round of, will this language stand in such a way that it provides a path that then provides some of the resolution that is being sought. And I'm not going to tell you whether this language gets that job done or not. I'm not going to tell you whether this language offers the resolution that's being sought or not. But I'm going to tell you that there's a whole history behind this kind of thing, and this is the next try. And repeatedly, what's been tried is different than what's been tried before. It's not like certain people are bringing the same thing every year because they're hoping to get it eventually to pass, even though it didn't pass last time. They're trying to say, okay, what wasn't passable about that one? So how can we change it so maybe this one will be passable? That will require kind of digging into the nuances and seeing whether you think things are different this time.
We'll have a lot to consider. I mean, and again, just on our behalf, because we're standing, thank you. I mean, you all have stood and elected, and we talk about submitting ourselves to ordination. There's sometimes I have a sense that people submit themselves to be GA commissioners. Like you take on a yoke, and we're grateful for you to do that. There's other business, and we would commend to you, as I think Forrest said this, first your own committee, so you're really well prepared, but then you'll see, you will make decisions that will, about things that come from other committees, and we certainly invite you to be as prepared as you can be. I think someone said they were done. Did you say you're printing stuff out, right? Like you're printing stuff out. I'm old enough and started, there you go. When I went to General Assembly as a youth advisory delegate in 1991, like they mailed all this stuff to us, and like in 3-ring binders. Like I had several 3-ring binders. It was overwhelming. I mean, like for me at that age. So it's a lot of material when you start looking.
High quality tote bags.
And high quality tote bags. That's right. So we've said. So there's other things you're going to do as a commissioner, as an assembly, besides vote on overtures. Believe it or not, you will elect your moderators. The 225th General Assembly elected Ruth Santana Grace, who's the executive presbyter of Philadelphia Presbytery and a member of our synod, right? She's part of our synod, and Siobhan Starling Lewis, who is a member of Presbytery in the South, as the co-moderators of that General Assembly. They will be the first people you see. In other words, when you start, they'll be your co-moderators. They'll be up front, they'll be leading you. Their job will be to help you elect new moderators. Our moderators or co-moderators serve for 2 years, and so you will elect co-moderators. It'll be one of the first things that you all do. Right now, it's 3 people in 2 groups, but let me just say you've got a binary choice to make. Okay, right now, I don't know if anybody else will stand or not. You have the option of either electing a moderator and a co-moderator, a moderator and a vice moderator, or co-moderators. So people can, and you don't get to choose. They either stand up and they say, we want to be co-moderators, or they stand up and they say, Forrest wants to be the moderator, I want to be the vice moderator, right? Those are, you'll get those choices. And I think I put some pictures up. Can you just, so, Marion McClure Taylor, that's who it is, in the fall announced that she was standing for either moderator or co-moderator. She doesn't know yet, and she has not made for lack of a better word, running. She has said that will come soon. So by the time you get to General Assembly, we presume, I mean, it needs to be Marion and someone else. She said she wants it to be a ruling elder, but and she hasn't said she's going to talk to that person about whether that person's a a vice moderator or a co-moderator. So it'll either be Marion plus another person, or it will be next slide, please, as they say, Reverend C.C. Armstrong and Reverend Tony Larson. And they have said they want to be co-moderators. They will, there's already, if you Google them, I mean, you can go out and find out some information. They will release probably some answers to questions or things that there might be a website. it's been a tricky thing because you stand for moderator, you don't run for moderator. And so we've had a little bit of a prohibition on too much kind of like campaigning, but a little bit of a prohibition isn't nothing. I mean, so there'll be a little bit, but it's not quite as much. They will almost certainly do something towards the beginning that gives you all a chance to ask them questions and get to know them. But just by way of reminder, if someone's standing up in front of 500 people and you say, I'm going to answer questions for the next 15 minutes, they're not going to answer 700 questions, right? So if you've got a question, this is the strategic thing, right? If you're like, I really want to know something from these people, you're going to want to be in line early. I mean, so this is the kind of thinking you have. So you will elect, again, I think one of those people to be your moderator, and then those people will moderate your meeting. There's actually inputs on here. There's proposed changes to the standing rules. And my understanding is the standing rules are going to change the election of the moderator from the beginning to the end. And what that would do is it would allow somebody to moderate the meeting they help prepare for. So right now, Siobhan and Ruth have chosen the co-moderators and moderators of committees for this General Assembly. But then they kind of just release it. And again, people have opinions about whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea, but I think that'll be coming before you as well. It would not affect Ruth and Siobhan. It would be the next round, not them.
You will also get the chance to elect a new stated clerk. Michael mentioned earlier today that Bronwyn Boswell has been serving as an interim stated clerk will have for the last year or so. For the 7 years prior, J. Herbert Nelson was the stated clerk. He was elected in a contest in 2016 and then without any contest in 2020. This time around, the stated clerk nominating committee has been meeting since the beginning of 2023 and just finished their work a week ago. Actually, or more recent, they just finished their work last Tuesday.
Of course, I was in
I staff them, which means I get to be the fly on the wall, but I don't tell them what I think. So the name has been named, but it is not yet announced. That'll happen by the end of April. And then there will be 2 weeks for somebody to identify themselves if they wish as a contestant. The only one who can be a contestant is somebody who put their paperwork in as part of the original screening back last fall. So if you did that in this room, you still have the chance. And if you didn't do that, don't start getting thoughts. I am holding my breath till May 11th because I really would like to see it be simple and smooth, and we'll see how it turns out.
It rarely has been.
It's not often that it's contested, yeah. And then if there is a contest, it would be the Wednesday of that week in plenary that the election would occur. If there is no contest, it would be the Monday of that week, right as the plenary gets started, that election would occur. And then that person becomes active. I'm about to stick my foot in it. Upon the close of the assembly. Am I right? Okay, yeah. So you will have a great opportunity there.
What Horace and I can tell you is it is not either one of us, nor will either one of us be any contest to it, so that we know. One of your responsibilities as a commissioner is to adopt the budget for the Office of the General Assembly and the Presbyterian Mission Agency. You don't have oversight of the budget for the Board of Pension. In other words, like, you're not going to look at their budget and approve it, but you will see a budget for the Office of the General Assembly and Presbyterian Mission Agency, and you will approve it. And that will happen on the very last day of plenary. They wait to then for the very reason that Hunter was asking, because as there's financial implications that go on in the assembly, they want to have a chance to work all that stuff around. And as I said before, and we'll mention again, there's this unification commission. They're working on combining those two agencies, including their budgets. It's enormously complicated work to combine two massive budgets. You've got about an $11–12 million agency in the Office of the General Assembly, about there's any account, it's just a $60 million agency, the Presbyterian Mission Agency, they got different parts of accounts. I mean, it's really complicated work to bring that together, but they're working to bring that together. We don't know what that will look like for you yet, because we haven't seen those things, but you'll see budgets.
We've already talked about the format of the assembly. In 2018, it was committees and plenary in person. In 2020, it was committees and plenary not in person. In 2022, it was committees in person and plenary not in person. In 2024, it is committees not in person and plenary in person. You get to decide what's going to happen in 2026.
And it could be any of those options. Right, I mean, like that's, it's a little bit of a wide open field. What we can tell you is that the more in person there is, the more expensive that it is. I mean, that's, so don't hear that as a plea for me to do the lowest cost thing. I'm just telling you that's the landscape of that. We've mentioned this before, so I don't think there's a lot more to say here. And actually, Forrest, I think maybe I'll just combine my two, and then you can bring it home with the season of rebuilding. So there's the Unification Commission that is operating in the background. And notice if you are fluent in Presby speak, there is a difference between a committee and a commission. A commission has been given particular powers by a council to do certain things. And the Unification Commission has been empowered by a previous General Assembly to take all the actions it needs to take to combine the Office of the General Assembly and the Presbyterian Mission Agency. In other words, they don't need to come back to another General Assembly and say, here's what we think the personnel structure should look like, right? Like they are in the midst of that work. They will bring, I mean, they've submitted a written report, and I didn't see it in PC Biz, but it's hard to prove a negative, right? So like you may find it in there, and I just haven't seen it. That is very much in the background of much that will be going on at the assembly, is that work, and the anxiety level of our colleagues who work for those two agencies, folks, is sky high. Because they're living through a very slow merger. I do mergers and acquisitions, person say to me once, you do a merger, you do it as fast as possible. Because of this, and again, that's not, don't tell me that's not our staff's fault, it's our structure, right? We take years to do things. So it's just very much, they're just very much living with what's the future look like, will there be jobs, where are we gonna be, how are we gonna work, what's my job gonna be, and I think we expect that'll be kind of in the earth. Along with that, the previous General Assembly also formed a group called the Funding Model Development Team. I'm the co-moderator of the Funding Model Development Team. And our job is to think about how we are funding the councils of the church above the congregation. So presbyteries, synods, and General Assembly. We are aware that when you tie funding to membership, which is per capita, and membership goes down, funding goes down. It is not personal, it's math, right? It also is a stress. We are also living in an age where there has been decreased mission giving at the Presbytery, Synod, and General Assembly level. And most of the councils of our church are using reserves to fund at least a part of their ministry. And we're bringing a report, we're not bringing any action items. But I think for me, to you all to be aware that the issues of how we fund a denominational structure that we formed in 1983 when we had 3.5 million members, and now we've got 1.1 million members, is an issue for us, and it will be continue to be before the assembly. And with that, funding has also impacted healthcare and forest.
And Forrest will talk about that, not funding. I am not going to try to explain to you the season of rebuilding here. Half of you know about it already. Half of you will find out plenty about it in the next month or so. News from the Board of Pensions over how the medical plan is going to work came out this week. And you are probably coming up to speed very quickly on it if you weren't already. What I want to do is say, this is one of those things that isn't before the assembly right now, but it is one of those things that has the possibility of coming before the assembly in a very quick manner. And I need to talk about procedure a moment here once again. There are three ways that items of business come before the assembly. Overtures from presbyteries, we talked about a bunch of those. Reports from agencies, we've talked about a bunch of those. And the third way that we haven't talked about is commissioner resolutions. Commissioner resolution is something that commissioners elected for service to this particular General Assembly can get together with one other commissioner, all it takes is two, from a different presbytery. And as long as they get their resolution in by a certain time before the start of plenary, that then becomes an item of business before the assembly. Normally, those resolutions are meant to be time sensitive and positional rather than of significant consequence financially. It's sort of like, I mean, and things that couldn't have been anticipated, right? So if on June 15th, Russia decides to invade Finland, there might be a commissioner resolution to that effect. You know, something about, you know, this is, we've got to say something. It would not surprise me, given the momentousness of the medical plan changes, if some kind of commissioner resolution is already getting cooked up by people who think that what has happened in the changes is not right. Whether that can have any immediate impact on the changes is a separate question than whether the assembly will make a statement about the changes. So keep an ear open to the possibility that that might happen.
And of course, I'll open my mouth here and I make my career in. I think that commissioner resolutions cannot propose changes to the book of order. Is that
correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I was worried if we say it.
Yes.
But that's just good for us. I mean, they can't, that there's, because those need more time to get into the system and for people, so that's the idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not sneaky ways to be like, by the way, do this.
Yeah, you can't slide a big difference in at the last minute and catch people by surprise. All right, I'm up here anyway. I'm gonna do one more thing on the bigger questions, then Mike's gonna have one more thing on the bigger questions. And then I'm going to come back with permission and give you one more pitch about the evaluation sheet, which I definitely got it. The question about what is the GA for? There was a time when if you'd asked the average commissioner, what they would have said is that the GA is for amending the book of order. And pastors would wait in line for years for their opportunity to be a GA commissioner so that they could vote on changes to the book of order or vote on making sure that changes to the book of order didn't happen because they weren't. That has changed significantly. There are still changes to the book of order, but a steep rise in the business of the assembly has found its way into social and policy statements. What is the position of the Presbyterian Church USA on X? And let me give you a couple of not exactly data points, but to give you an idea of it. In the early 1970s, and this is something you can find on the PCUSA website, you can find the position and policy statements of the PCUSA on the website, organized by the General Assembly in which they occurred. And I took a look at this, and the thing that I discovered is that in the early to mid 1970s, you saw one policy statement about once every 4 General Assemblies. In the last 5 to 10 years, we are seeing 5 to 10 policy statements at every General Assembly. So it's done this sort of exponential growth thing as far as making statements. Michael's colleague at the Presbytery of Donegal was a reporter for Presbyterian News Service in 2016 and 2018, and she counted them up and made the observation that there were more policy statements at those two General Assemblies than there are entirely items of business at this assembly combined. So whether it be intentional or by accident, one of the things that the assembly seems to be finding its way into a future of is taking positions on social issues, so that when somebody in the Lutheran Church asks, what do Presbyterians think about X? The Presbyterians can say, here, read this. You decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But it does seem to raise the question of what is the assembly for? And it seems like that question is getting answered in the act.
And to maybe just add one other thing to that, and then a segue to just a few remarks about the future. In pre-COVID, a major part of the General Assembly was often an exhibit hall, and all the agencies would, I mean, actually, with some, like, they build things and bring things in, and you go in the assembly hall, and then actually they closed it down during plenary, so people could come to plenary. It was like, I mean, it was very intentional about when it was open, when it was not open. There won't be an exhibit hall because the exhibit hall is not open during plenary, and you're only going to be in person for plenary. And one of the purposes of the plenary was what you might call the PCUSA family reunion. It was where people went and they talked and they saw people that they had seen in their previous General Assembly. And I think it'll be interesting to see what Salt Lake City is like if the purpose of the General Assembly is to bring us together relationally, because it's less time, you know, and that is a segue to me for, as we thought about this, as we talked with our colleagues, you all are going to have an interesting part of shaping the future of this denomination. And you will do so in the midst of vast change. Quite frankly, more change than I've seen coming to any other General Assembly. Like, we're in the midst of more change. I mean, oftentimes there was a couple of policy things and maybe one big kind of fight that we have about some ordination piece or something like that. And here you all are in the midst of a merger of our two major national agencies that guide our denomination, funding issues, and vast changes with our medical plans. I mean, there is shrinking congregations, and you know what? We've got aging leadership in terms of who's the leaders of our denominations and what that means for our future. And you all are you have been called for this moment to be our General Assembly. And we are really grateful that you would stand to that and help us seek God's future. With that, we'd like to be evaluated.
So 18 items, 3 minutes per item would be 54 minutes. We got it in 52 minutes. Michael, congratulations. So you should have had 2 sheets or 2 stacks of sheets on the table. One was the agenda for today and the other are the evaluations. I have 3 things, maybe 4, about the evaluations. First one is, please fill them out. The kind of feedback that we get is really valuable in terms of being able to tinker, so that when we do it next time, we're like, okay, yeah, this worked well, we need to adjust, et cetera, et cetera. If you have concrete narrative input, that's really valuable too, for the sake of the tinkering. If there's something where you are specifically critical because it didn't work well, but there's a way to make it work well, please include your name so that we can touch base with you, not to write you off as a cranky pants, but so that we can actually get clarity on what you're thinking about there in order to make it better. If there's something that you just didn't like and it didn't scratch your back and it's like, whatever, give it a 2 or a 1 and don't leave your name, because we don't need to know that you just didn't like it. We only need to know who you are if there's something that could make a big difference. So that's, fill it out, give your reasons to give your name. Item number 3, yeah, they're off board. Item number 3 is we didn't get to parliamentary procedure, so everybody please circle not applicable to that one. Oh, 5 items. Please remember, a 1 is bad and a 5 is great. Okay, if you put 1s all the way down and then write fantastic day, we're gonna be confused. Okay, and then final one is, I am toying with the idea of asking you to do this again after the General Assembly. To see if your experience there versus your experience having not been to it is like, oh, well, in retrospect, that talk really didn't help much. Or, wow, I never expected that that talk would be so helpful.
So you're not gonna bring us all back for a day?
Yes, you have to, no. And you can just leave them on your table and take off when you're done at your leisure. May I not only pray for your safe trip home today, but for God to use you before and during Salt Lake City. Jesus, thank you that you have chosen to work through your church, that you not only rose, but that you ascended so that you might leave us behind by the power of your Spirit to do more than you would have been able to do on your own had you stayed on earth as a human being. We pray that your work would go forth again by the power of your Holy Spirit through these people, not just in a couple of weeks in June and July, but that too, but in all that they do in their service to and through the church. We pray for this afternoon that you would get them home safely, and for those who have still a decent long night of work ahead, that you would inspire them such that their parishioners tomorrow are startled at how good a sermon that was, even when they themselves maybe don't feel it. Amen.
Yeah.